Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 701 Good News and Bad News. Harry was reluctant, but he couldn't hold it in any longer, so he pressed his lips to the merman's and inhaled a small breath of oxygen. But the moment he put it to his mouth, he nearly fainted. Harry wasn't suffering from oxygen intoxication, nor was he excited from kissing a woman. He was simply overwhelmed by the stench. The merman seemed to haven't brushed her teeth in months. Her mouth reeked of a strange, putrid odor that made Harry's head throb and his stomach churn. He almost vomited into the merman's mouth. Considering it was his oxygen tank, and that spitting it in would only make him feel disgusted, Harry forced himself to hold it in. The Black Lake wasn't particularly deep, but for Harry, the distance from the bottom to the shore felt like a marathon, long and agonizing. When he surfaced, his vision was blurred, his limbs were weak, and his entire body was limp. The effect was even more potent than the venom of the loba worm. For a fleeting moment, Harry even saw his great-grandmother beckoning him with a kind smile, as if to take him away. Harry surfaced, gasping for fresh air, and it took him several minutes to recover. He cried out in agony, "That was my first kiss." He wanted to save it for Cho Chang. "No, Harry, this wasn't your first kiss," Ron reminded him, gagging. "Have you forgotten? In our first year, we went to the 4th floor restricted area, and you and Malfoy fell down and kissed." Dead memories assaulted Harry's mind. He said blankly, "Ron, thanks for reminding me." "You have a good memory, you're welcome." Ron continued to vomit. The students in the audience, hearing Ron and Harry's words, all turned to look at the Slytherin seats. Their gazes all fell on Draco Malfoy. Pansy, clutching her collar and with tears welling in her eyes, cried out, "Draco, did Harry Potter really steal your first kiss?" "That despicable bitch." Malfoy didn't speak, but a blush crept onto his pale cheeks. Harry and Ron had forgotten that the audience could hear their conversation. They were currently discussing the competition without any restraint. "Ron, are you sure you don't want to do the second challenge?" "No." Ron shook his head with lingering fear. "Those magical creatures you mentioned look really tough. I probably can't handle them." Being tough wasn't the problem. The real issue is that Ron couldn't breathe underwater and had to carry a mermaid oxygen tank. Swimming up from the lakebed had almost suffocated Ron. If he got stuck in the challenge, wouldn't he have to keep on oxygen? That would be the death of him. Ron, heartbroken over the 5 galleons he'd borrowed, grumbled, "Why can't we breathe underwater anymore?" "That goes without saying," Harry said coldly. It was Snape's doing. Harry was determined to get revenge. If he didn't, he'd change his name from Potter to Snape. "That old dog Snape, we'll make him pay sooner or later." Ron cursed as well. He then unleashed a torrent of insults at Snape, all clearly transmitted back through the magical curtain. The students in the audience stared in shock at Ron, then their gazes fell on Snape. Snape's face was grim. He looked like he wanted to drown Ron. Time was running out. Harry and Ron had to reach the shore as quickly as possible. Fortunately, riding their mermaid wives, they sped towards the shore as if in a small boat. During this journey, Harry and Ron constantly overtook other warriors, making them envious and wishing they could have such a ride too. Looking at those gazes, Harry sighed. Envious? Mating rights in exchange. Ralph took Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur to the kitchen for snacks. This time, no unexpected situations arose, and they returned to Black Lake after a smooth meal. By then, most of the warriors had returned to shore, including the students who hadn't completed their missions, who had been brought back by the mermaids. The 5 judges huddled together, discussing something intensely. A moment later, Ludo Bagman's magically amplified voice rang in everyone's ears. The audience in the stands immediately fell silent, and the warriors all looked at Ludo, anxiously awaiting the scores. "Ladies and gentlemen, after discussion by the judging panel, we have made our scores for the warriors," Ludo said. "The second task is also out of 100. The warrior who rescues the hostage and returns to shore within the allotted time will receive a base score of 50. If the hostage is rescued but arrives more than 2 hours late, only 25 points will be awarded. In addition, each judge will receive 10 points, for a total of 50 points. Hearing Ludo's words, most of the warriors looked disappointed. They had all exceeded the time limit, meaning the gap was at least 25 points. Harry, however, was overjoyed. He had completed the task within the last 2 hours, just a hair's breadth away from exceeding the time limit. Ralph Scamander was the first warrior to complete the task. He displayed amazing skill in dealing with those magical creatures, Ludo said. Therefore, we give him 97 points. The Hufflepuff students in the crowd cheered enthusiastically, their voices deafening. After the cheers subsided, Ludo continued, "There's one more thing we must consider. Scamander was ambushed by 4 dark wizards on his return journey and captured them. Most of the judges," Ludo said, glancing at Karkaroff with obvious displeasure, "felt this deserved compensation and a reward. So, after a vote by the judges, we've decided to award Scamander an extra 10 points, bringing his total to 107. Louder applause erupted, and students jumped up and down, screaming for Karkaroff. Shirley Swinton was the second warrior to finish the competition. She displayed an exceptionally high level of transfiguration skill, leaving a deep impression on every judge, Ludo announced loudly. After discussion, we ultimately awarded her 93 points. Next, Fleur received 89 points, while Hermione scored slightly lower at 86. Both arrived almost simultaneously and performed similarly, but Fleur's higher score was due to Madame Maxim's shamelessness in giving her a perfect score. Victor Krum used transfiguration, incomplete but still effective. He was the 5th to return with a hostage, so we give him 80 points. Karkaroff clapped enthusiastically, looking smug. He too had given his student a perfect score. Harry Potter used the water-breathing potion, which was only moderately effective, but he received help from the mermaid. Ludo continued. We give him 74 points. Soon it was Ron's turn, and the judges discussed it again. Ron's situation was special. He hadn't rescued the hostage, but he had reached the shore within the allotted time. Ron was hopeful, hoping for the base score of 25, but unfortunately, after discussion, the judges gave him 4 points, exactly the same as his score in the first round. But Ron wasn't too upset, because he wasn't last. Polyako, whom he had defeated, only had 3 points. Just as Ron was consoling himself, Ginny walked over. Ron immediately asked anxiously, "Ginny, did you place the 5 galleons for me?" "Yes," Ginny said with a smile. "I have good news and bad news. Which do you want to hear first?" "The good news." "The good news is, I didn't listen to you and bet on you and Harry to win," Ginny said. Ron raised his eyebrows, a glimmer of hope rising in his heart. Could it be that Ginny bet on Ron to win? Even if he didn't make a lot of money, at least he'd break even. He cautiously asked, "And the bad news?" "The bad news is," Ginny grinned, "I bet you were last, and the odds were pretty good, but unfortunately, Durmstrang's Polyako has a 1 point lower score than you." Chapter 702 The Thief Gryffindor. After the judges' scoring, the second event of the Triwizard Tournament finally came to a close. For the warriors, some were happy, some were sad. This difference in mood was positively correlated with their scores. The higher the score, the better the mood, and vice versa. Hermione was an exception. Despite scoring a high 86 and ranking 4th, she looked utterly dejected. You'd think she was 4th from last. This behavior undoubtedly made those warriors with lower scores even angrier, wishing they could give her an Avada Kedavra. In contrast, the students were generally happy. Although the second event only lasted 2 hours, the competition was still exciting and thrilling. Whether it was the Death Eater attack, the appearance of the two-tailed golden mermaid, or Harry and Ron's one-time deal with the Black Lake Mermaid, all were worth discussing repeatedly by the young wizards. Of course, everyone was even more amazed by Ralph's 107 points, which meant he got 201 points in 2 rounds, 1 point more than the perfect score. As expected of Scamander, even the score ceiling couldn't limit him. Meanwhile, the bottom few warriors still had single-digit scores after 2 rounds. They were all students, so why was the difference between them greater than that between a person and a dog? Ralph didn't pay much attention to the young wizards' discussions. After the competition, he returned to the Black Lake, found Marcella, and brought her back to the box. He also took the injured horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster, placing it in a lake within the box. The sea monster's injuries weren't serious, the only problem was its volatile temper. During treatment, it would constantly attack Ralph. Fortunately, Marcella was there. Her singing was enough to put the sea monster to sleep. Standing atop the sea monster's head, Ralph took the white essence handed to him by Sherry and sprinkled the potion on the monster's wounds. He poured a whole bottle of the potion, a dosage that would make a wizard's calluses grow, but it was just right for the sea monster. A plume of green smoke rose, and when it dissipated, the bleeding from the sea monster had stopped, and the wounds appeared to have healed for several days, with a new layer of skin covering the previously exposed flesh. Not far away, Marcella floated on the lake, chatting with Hermione, Fleur, and Gabrielle on the shore. They had known each other for a long time, since Ralph had rescued Marcella on the May, and the Fleur sisters had also been on board. Marcella took several large pearls from her pocket, saying, "These are gifts for you." The pearls were the size of pebbles, emitting a soft glow, and looked extremely precious, so the girls all shook their heads, too embarrassed to accept them. Ralph, carrying Sherry, left the sea monster and flew back to shore, smiling. "You should accept them. These are mermaid pearls." "What are mermaid pearls?" Gabrielle asked curiously. Hermione, the know-it-all, quickly explained, "There are two types of pearls. One type is produced by mollusks, like clams. When a foreign object enters the clam's body, the pain and itching stimulate it, causing them to secrete a substance called nacre within their shells, which encapsulates the harmful substance. Over time, this eventually forms a complete pearl." The other type of pearl is produced by mermaids who use their bodies as clams, secreting a special mucus to cultivate the pearl. These pearls are 100 times more precious than ordinary pearls. "That's right," Ralph nodded, adding, "Mermaid pearls are as bright as the moon because they absorb the magic of mermaids. The pearl powder they produce, when ingested, has amazing skin care and beautifying effects." Hearing this, the girls exchanged glances and immediately accepted the pearls, including Gabrielle. Even though she was still young and didn't need them yet, she knew she'd become an 18-year-old auntie someday. Ralph accepted a pearl, gently breathed on it, wiped it with a tissue, and whispered, "By the way, Marcella, I have something I need your help with." "What is it?" Marcella asked curiously. Ralph gave Sherry a look, and the girl understood, turning and leaving. A moment later, she returned with a statue. It was a golden mermaid statue with 3 heads, each facing a different direction, and 6 arms, while sharing one body. The mermaid's 6 arms held a cross, a box, a scythe, and 3 extinguished torches. Last summer, Ralph took Sherry to Ravenclaw's tomb, where they discovered this statue. When they touched the mermaid statue, they were transported into a dreamlike state. Later, Ralph asked Dumbledore, who said the statue might be related to the sirens. And Marcella, as a descendant of Persepolis, one of the sirens, might know something. Marcella, upon seeing the statue, was immediately captivated. Staring intently at it, she asked, "Ralph, where did you get it?" Ralph didn't mention Ravenclaw's grave, he simply said softly, "I found it at Hogwarts." "Do you recognize it?" "Yes," Marcella nodded vigorously. "It's a statue of the 3 sirens. The 3 heads represent my ancestors, Persephone, Sirens, and Scylla. According to the story passed down in our tribe, each of the 3 sisters possessed a statue, and when the 3 statues came together, they would become this large statue with 3 heads and 6 arms." Ralph frowned. "Is Persephone's statue still in your tribe?" "Yes, but it's a replica." Marcella's expression was grave. "Legend has it that 1,000 years ago, the real statue was stolen by Gryffindor. Standing by the Black Lake, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle each consumed Gil Sacrebs. For the students, the second event of the Triwizard Tournament was over, but for them, the competition had just begun. Malfoy, having already learned the details of the competition from Snape, was well prepared. Malfoy glanced at Alecto Carrow not far away, seeing her face covered in blood and clearly badly injured, and sneered, gloating, "I warned those 2 siblings not to mess with Scamander, but they wouldn't listen. What a bunch of idiots." Goyle, standing nearby, looked worried. "Lucius, those mermaids will take students hostage and force the heroes to rescue them. Our hostage is probably your son. If we don't rescue him, are we really okay? What's there to be afraid of?" "Dumbledore wouldn't let them die, would he?" Malfoy said nonchalantly. "We'll go into the water. As long as we hide and wait until time runs out, we'll be fine. Just don't go to that building in the mermaid village to rescue the hostages." Through the magical veil, Malfoy saw that many dangerous magical creatures would spawn inside the building. Given Dumbledore's personality, the difficulty would definitely increase. In short, going in is suicide. Just then, Sirius Black strode over. Malfoy snorted and asked, "Has the competition started?" Sirius Black nodded. "It has." Malfoy was about to go into the water when Sirius Black stopped him, laughing. "Don't rush, I'll take you straight to that building in the Mermaid Village. Your second challenge is to spend a whole day inside." Chapter 703 Margaret's Invitation. Standing at the entrance of the shell-shaped building, Sirius Black coldly watched Malfoy and his companions. Lupin, wand in hand, stood guard on the other side, ready to respond to any possible attack. This was the bottom of the Black Lake, surrounded by a group of mermaids. Malfoy, of course, wouldn't attack. He was simply dawdling, killing time, unwilling to go inside. Malfoy's original plan was to find a place to hide once he was in the water, resolutely refusing to come to the Mermaid Village, much less enter this building. But who would have thought that Sirius Black, disregarding all sorcery, would skip the foreplay and bring them here? It was utterly despicable. Malfoy mentally cursed all the women of the Black family, except for his wife, Narcissa. Seeing their reluctance to enter, Sirius Black finally showed impatience, saying, "What's the point of wasting your time if you're going to stay inside until this time tomorrow?" Malfoy glared at Sirius Black, then swam into the room, followed closely by Goyle, Crabbe, Ada Avery Jr., and Electo Caro. The door closed, and the group entered a room adorned with murals depicting various magical creatures. Malfoy, through a magical veil, already knew the murals would come to life. The next second, sure enough, ripples spread across the murals, and the mermaids in the paintings stepped out. According to the previous rules, each person entering would trigger the appearance of a mermaid, with 5 people in total. This meant 5 mermaids would appear. But to Malfoy's astonishment, the number of mermaids didn't stop after reaching 5. More mermaids continued to come to life. Finally, when the entire room was filled with mermaids, they stopped appearing. Malfoy stared at the 50 mermaids surrounding them, swallowed hard, and cursed, "Sirius Black. Fuck you." The Triwizard Tournament's Death Eaters competition was still ongoing, and the students, having finished their students' competition, were given the opportunity to travel to Hogsmeade. Ralph hadn't originally planned to go. He intended to take Sherry and Hermione to the Chamber of Secrets in Ravenclaw to carefully examine any historical records regarding the mermaid statues. Although Marcella said Gryffindor stole the statues from the Mermaid Village, that only applied to the Persephone statue. Where did the Sirens and Scylla statues come from? Gryffindor had also said he would place the items taken from the Mermaid Village in a place marked with mermaid symbols, so why were they in Ravenclaw's tomb? While Ralph was busy, he suddenly received a letter from Margaery, inviting him to meet at Hogsmeade. Since the Christmas ball, Margaery had been keeping an eye on Rita Skeeter and hadn't been heard from for months. Receiving her letter, Ralph didn't hesitate and, with Sherry and Hermione, boarded a Thestrals and headed to Hogsmeade. Walking along the bustling streets of Hogsmeade, a sullen Ron said in a low voice, "Harry, I'll definitely pay you back the 5 galleons I borrowed, but it'll probably be a while." "Forget about it," Harry waved his hand. "Consider it a Christmas present for you, but that panoramic telescope you gave me at last year's Quidditch World Cup already used up my Christmas presents for the next 10 years, Ron said, his face flushed. Harry was momentarily speechless. He had completely forgotten about it. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Then let's keep it for now. You can pay me back after you graduate and get a job. How about we go to the Three Broomsticks for a drink?" "It's on me." Harry knew that Ron had always liked Mrs. Rosmerta, the proprietress of the Three Broomsticks, and going there for a drink would cheer him up. Ron's spirits lifted immediately. "Let's go." The two arrived at the Three Broomsticks pub. As Ron pushed open the door, he eagerly searched for Mrs. Rosmerta. However, he didn't see Rosmerta. Instead, he was drawn to a young witch in the corner. The witch leaned against the window, revealing her fair, delicate arms. Her thick blonde hair cascaded naturally over her shoulders, and she wore an exquisitely patterned, almost intricate, white robe, her beauty breathtaking. A blood-red lollipop dangled from her lips, but instead of appearing childish, it complemented her scarlet lips perfectly, radiating a powerful and alluring aura. The witch's presence drew all eyes to the pub, making Mrs. Rosmerta pale in comparison. Harry and Ron immediately recognized her as Ralph's sister, Margaret. Beside Margaret sat Rita Skeeter. Upon seeing Rita, Harry paused for a moment, then stormed over, shouting angrily, "Hey, look what you've done!" Rita Skeeter turned around, and upon seeing who it was, her jeweled eyes widened instantly. "Harry," she exclaimed, her face lighting up with a smile. Long time no see. Want to have a drink with me? I'd rather be near a dragon than near you, Harry said angrily. Why did you slander Hagrid like that in your article? You got him fired, and now he's too scared to come back to class. Rita raised an eyebrow and smiled. Slander? I didn't slander him. I was just reporting the facts, telling my readers the truth. It's my duty, reporting the facts. Yes, isn't Hagrid a half-giant? Rita shrugged. Where did I go wrong? Who cares if Hagrid is a half-giant? Harry shouted. We all like him, we don't hate him at all, yet you described him as so abnormal. The entire bar fell silent. Mrs. Rosmerta peered over from behind the bar. She was pouring meat into a large jug that was overflowing, without her noticing. Rita Skeeter's smile flickered slightly. She quickly opened her crocodile skin handbag, pulled out her stenographer, and asked, Would you like to tell me what you know about Hagrid, Harry? Your perplexing, twisted friendship, and the reasons behind it. Did you see Hagrid as a father figure because you lacked a father figure in your childhood? We all know giants mean cruelty. Has Hagrid ever hurt you or threatened you? Don't be afraid, speak up bravely, and I will help you seek justice. Harry was trembling with rage. He pulled out his wand, wanting to teach Rita a lesson, but Ron grabbed Harry's arm tightly and dragged him out of the pub. Rita wanted to chase after them, but she glanced at Margaret calmly licking her lollipop beside her and didn't dare to move. That woman was a complete devil. The door was quickly pushed open again, and Ron entered the pub with Sherry and Hermione. Margaret, resting her chin on her hand, waved to Ron and said, Over here. The three walked towards Margaret and sat down in chairs. Ron glanced at Rita, then looked at Margaret with a puzzled expression and asked, What's she doing here? I sent her, Margaret said, taking a few pieces of parchment from her pocket and handing them to Ron, winking. Take a look at this first. Ralph took the parchment, glanced at its contents, and his pupils dilated instantly. He looked up, his eyes coldly fixed on Rita. Chapter 704 Genius or Pervert? The True Face of Playboy Ralph Scamander. Seeing Ralph's unusual expression, Sherry and Hermione both leaned closer, glancing at the parchment in his hand. They nearly burst out laughing after just one glance at the title, Genius or Pervert? The True Face of Playboy Ralph Scamander. As a recipient of 2 Order of Merlin first-class medals, Ralph Scamander had captured the Death Eater Peter Pettigrew, helped Black clear his name, and saved countless innocents in last summer's world-shaking Quidditch World Cup final. He was undoubtedly the most sought-after wizarding genius in recent years. However, journalist Rita Skeeter, in her in-depth investigation of Scamander, unexpectedly discovered a hidden, unknown side of this genius. His private life was extremely chaotic, involving inappropriate relationships with multiple witches, all minors. Yes, he has extremely close relationships with Shirley Swinton and Hermione Granger, said a male student from Slytherin House who wished to remain anonymous, named Draco. The three of them have been inseparable since their first year, whether it's going to class, the library, or Hogsmeade Village, like conjoined twins. They're definitely dating. Scamander, already dating 2 girls, wasn't satisfied. He also captivated a pair of Indian twin sisters. The younger sister, Padma Pettier, even shyly told the reporter, Of course I like Ralph, there's no girl in Ravenclaw who isn't smitten with him. Padma also mentioned that she had invited Scamander to India for the summer, and she wanted to swim naked in the gangs with him. These few female students weren't enough to satisfy Scamander's insatiable appetite. Recently, he also set his sights on Fleur Delacour, a top student at Boxburton School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. This beautiful girl, with Velar blood, clearly held a strong attraction for a wizard like Scamander, from a family of magical creatures. The reporter's statement wasn't unfounded. In the Forbidden Forest lives a group of kind-hearted centaurs. One of them, named Bane, who is extremely friendly to wizards, accused Scamander to a reporter. Scamander has kidnapped my fiancée, Nymeria. During a defense against the dark arts class, the students, led by Mad Eye, entered the Forbidden Forest. Bane, desperate to find his fiancée, even clashed with Scamander in class. Many students can testify to this. In addition, a witch named Margaret Kowalski traveled all the way from America to demand that Scamander take responsibility. Rumor has it that Margaret is 6 months pregnant with Scamander's child. When the reporter asked Margaret why Scamander had abandoned her, she told the reporter, Ralph only likes underage girls under 17. He abandoned me after I came of age? The reporter breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this answer, meaning she wouldn't be Scamander's target. Ralph only read a third of the story before he couldn't bear to continue. because in such a short time, over a dozen witches had already appeared. According to Rita's description, Ralph wasn't just a playboy, he was a lecherous monster. But in reality, the most outrageous thing Ralph had ever done was sleeping in bed with Sherry, without even taking off his clothes. So, Ralph raised his head, his cold gaze fixed on Rita, a deep killing intent flashing in his blue eyes. "Rita Skeeter, I warned you last year at the German Ministry of Magic not to write anything about me. It seems you didn't take my words seriously." The next second, a tiny, finger-length sword, as thin as a cicada's wing, shot out of Ralph's pocket, aiming for Rita's head. Unable to use magic to defend herself, Rita tilted her head sharply to the left, the sword drawing a bloody gash across her face. Seeing Ralph's sudden attack, Sherry immediately drew her wand and, in perfect harmony, cast an earplugs spell. Thus, when Rita let out a painful scream, the other guests in the room didn't hear her. Hermione, seeing Rita try to get up and run away, also raised her wand and used magic to bind her to the chair. Under Ralph's control, the sword drew a large arc, finally hovering in front of Rita's head, the tip pressed precisely against her brow. Rita stared at the small sword, terrified. She stammered, "Mr. Scamander, I didn't intend to publish this article. I was just writing it for fun. Please don't kill me." "Writing it for fun," Ralph smiled, but that smile was chillingly menacing. "Then I'll play with you today." With that, the boy tapped his finger lightly on the table, and the small sword pierced straight into Rita's brow, leaving a long, inch-long gash. A torrent of blood flowed down her cheek. The excruciating pain contorted Rita's face. She wanted to writhe on the ground in agony, but her body was firmly bound, unable to move. Rita bit her lip hard, not realizing it was bleeding. She looked at Margaret beside her and pleaded, "Please, save me, Miss Kowalski." Margaret ignored Rita. She crossed her legs, elegantly picked up a cup of black tea, pinched the lid, and gently fanned the steam. The fragrant aroma filled the air, and she closed her eyes, somewhat intoxicated, to inhale its fragrance. Only after Rita fainted from the pain did Margaret slowly open her eyes, smile at Rove, and say, "After the Christmas ball, I followed Rita Skeeter into her house and found her writing this article." Rove, upon hearing this, felt a lingering fear. Fortunately, Margaret discovered it in time, otherwise, if Rita had published the article in the Daily Prophet, he couldn't imagine how badly his reputation would have been ruined. Margaret picked up the parchment and chuckled, "To be honest, this woman's writing is indeed very powerful. Her articles are extremely persuasive and easily believable. Ralph, when I first read this article, I almost believed I was really 6 months pregnant with your child." Ralph sighed. "So, now you know why I didn't accept Rita Skeeter's interview and why I'm so wary of her, right? But if used properly, she can be a good weapon." Margaret's lips curled into a smile. "Ralph, don't kill Rita, she's still useful to me." Ralph sheathed his small sword, somewhat puzzled. "Useful? What do you want to do with her?" Margaret didn't mince words, stating in a calm tone what was nothing short of earth-shattering. "I want to use her to exchange for a minister for magic in England." Chapter 705 The New Minister of Magic. The Minister for Magic is the highest-ranking official in the British wizarding world, possessing full authority over all affairs of the magical community and exclusive jurisdiction over the Ministry of Magic as a whole. The position is equivalent to that of the Prime Minister in British Muggle society, perhaps even greater in power and scope. For Margaret to propose replacing such a powerful and influential position is nothing short of arrogant. Sherry's eyes widened, and Hermione's hand trembled, spilling her butterbeer all over herself. However, Ralph calmly gazed at Margaret. Others might think she was joking or spouting nonsense, but knowing his crazy sister as he did, Ralph didn't find it funny at all. Instead, he asked seriously, "What are you planning to do?" The year before last, Peter Pettigrew escaped, and last year, the Dark Mark appeared in the Quidditch World Cup final, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of wizards. These two events have already severely damaged Fudge's prestige. Margaret leaned forward slightly, holding her teacup between two fingers, and smiled calmly. "If it suddenly comes out that Barty Crouch has escaped from Azkaban, how do you think people will view him as minister? A minister who has only been in office for 5 years, and has caused so much trouble during his term. What will people think of him? Damn it, he'll have to step down." The most crucial point is that Crouch's escape happened in January, and it's only now in March that it's being revealed. Margaret clicked her tongue. The public may not care about Crouch's escape, but they definitely care about their right to know. I can have Rita Skeet write articles, making a big deal out of the Ministry of Magic concealing the truth and the public's right to know, using public opinion to pressure Fudge to step down. Even so, Fudge might stubbornly hold on, or even capture Crouch to salvage his reputation. Therefore, Margaret has other trump cards. When Fudge's public image is at its worst, deliberately write reports praising him, exaggerating his achievements mindlessly, and portraying his character as a flawless moral exemplar. For those who criticize Fudge, directly label them as foreign powers, thereby inducing neutral people to genuinely dislike Fudge and causing his public image to collapse. Then it's even simpler. You're a moral exemplar? Then expose all of Fudge's dirty laundry. Margaret had recently been reviewing the materials Rita Skeeter had collected and discovered considerable evidence of Fudge accepting bribes. In addition, she planned to fabricate further damaging allegations against Fudge: bribery with his subordinate Umbridge, abuse of power for personal gain, bringing immense benefits to his family, eavesdropping on rivals, and an affair with a Ministry of Magic intern. With Rita Skeeter's uniquely inflammatory writing style, she could ruin Fudge's reputation overnight. This combined attack would be enough to remove Fudge from his position as minister. Of course, Margaret didn't reveal this tactic. Sherry and Hermione were still young, and she didn't want to corrupt them. Listening to Margaret's concise plan to remove Fudge from office, Hermione's eyes widened in confusion. "Ralph," she asked, "Minister Fudge and you have a good relationship with Professor Dumbledore, don't you? Why do you want him to step down?" "Hermione," Ralph patiently explained, "it only appears to be a good relationship. This friendship is based on the premise that Professor Dumbledore and I are very famous, which can help Fudge solidify his position as Minister of Magic without posing a threat to him. But Voldemort could resurrect at any time," Ralph said softly. "Once Voldemort resurrects, Fudge and the Ministry of Magic will need to cooperate in propaganda and declare war on him. But Fudge won't believe in Voldemort's resurrection. He'll only think it's a lie, a fabrication to seize his power, and then he'll turn against us. That's how it was in the original timeline. Fudge spent almost a year slandering and opposing Dumbledore, causing him to lose his position as president of the International Confederation of Wizarding Officials. Fudge also sent Umbridge to cause trouble at Hogwarts, expelling Dumbledore from the school. In this pointless infighting, the entire wizarding world missed the best opportunity to fight Voldemort and the Death Eaters. If Fudge had been removed from office sooner, and the Ministry of Magic's resources and manpower had been better integrated earlier, the ministry wouldn't have been occupied, and the wizarding war might not have resulted in so many deaths. Fudge is arguably the biggest culprit in the Second Wizarding War. Therefore, his early removal from office was inevitable and necessary. Seeing that Hermione still didn't believe him, Ralph laughed. "Don't believe me? Let's make a bet. I bet that if Voldemort were to be resurrected, Fudge wouldn't believe it and would break with Dumbledore." Hearing the word bet, Hermione felt PTSD. She shook her head like a rattled drum, only offering one word: "Get lost." Then, as if to show her determination, she added, "I'd rather die than bet with you." Shirley laughed. "Ralph, I'll bet with you." "Okay." Ralph nodded. "Whoever loses washes the other's clothes for a month." Upon hearing this, the girl with the ponytail bit her lip, her long, bright eyes filled with both resentment and shyness. "This bet, win or lose, is a win for you." "No way." Shirley rested her elbow on the armrest of her chair, propped her cheek on her hand, tilted her head, and smiled at the boy, saying, "If I win, we'll switch roles. You'll be my assistant for a month, and you'll do whatever I ask. This bet is fair." Hermione expressed her support. If Shirley won, she could use her to make unreasonable demands on Ralph. Margaret watched the three of them struggling with this, and after a moment, she moved to a spot by the window and asked, "Getting Fudge out of office isn't difficult, but who will replace him? Have you thought about it?" Ralph also pondered. "The new Minister for Magic must be one of their own. If Dumbledore were willing to be minister, that would be ideal, but he's unlikely to take the position. The next likely candidate is Scrimgeour, the Auror's chief of staff, but he has his own agenda and is clearly not one of their own. Ralph needs to find someone of his own caliber, whose reputation and abilities are no less than Scrimgeour's, to be minister, and he can't think of anyone right now." "Ralph, why don't you be the Minister for Magic?" Margaret declared immediately. Ralph rolled his eyes. "I'm only 14, I'm an adult now, why don't I be the minister?" Margaret joked. "The British won't let an American write on their heads," Ralph said. "This isn't the Muggle world." "Then, what about her grandfather?" Ralph shook his head again. Grandpa would never be interested in such things. Margaret picked up her cup, poured herself another cup of tea, took a slow sip, and said, "Ralph, I wasn't talking about Grandpa Newt." Ralph paused, narrowing his eyes at Margaret. After a long while, he hesitated and said, "You're not talking about her great-grandfather, are you?" "It's him." Margaret smiled. "He was once the head of the Auror office, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and trained a large number of outstanding wizards such as Mad-Eye Moody and Scrimgeour. His students hold various important positions in the Ministry of Magic. He's also the war hero who fought against Gellert Grindelwald and Voldemort, Theseus Scamander. Doesn't he deserve to be the Minister for Magic of England?" Chapter 706 Voldemort's Orders. Inside the enormous room, a swarm of runes gathered, constantly slithering and pounding against a magical shield, producing a chilling thud. Malfoy, hiding behind the shield, stared at the runes with utter despair. If it were only a few, or even a dozen, snakes, the 5 of them could handle it, but dozens of runes attacking together, it was utterly impossible. Not to mention his injuries, his right eye was swollen shut, and his shoulder, injured by the mermaid in the earlier fight, was inflamed, constantly oozing blood and pus. The other Death Eaters were in even worse shape. Ada Avery was left with only an arm, Goyle had been impaled in the abdomen by a mermaid and had lost an eye, Crabbe had one ear cut off. This group of wounded and weakened warriors, forced to endure the onslaught of runes for several more hours, seemed unpredictable to Malfoy. Then, under the onslaught of the runes, the magical shield finally gave way, collapsing and vanishing instantly. Ada Avery, with her arm missing, brandished her wand in her left hand, cursing angrily, "Go to hell and burn you all." A ball of black flame shot from the tip of her wand, landing on the ruined serpent, which instantly burst into flames. The flames spread across its body, quickly engulfing it, but the black flames did not disappear. Instead, they scorched the lake water and spread towards another ruined serpent. "Fuck you, you bastard," Malfoy roared. "We'll be consumed by fiend fire too." The power of the demonic flames was immense, they could burn anything, and they were trapped in the room, unable to escape. Using this dark magic was tantamount to suicide. Alecto Carroll waved her wand, trying to control the fiend fire and extinguish it, but she only fueled the fire. The black flames grew stronger, like swift black snakes, lunging at her. Her sleeve also caught fire, and her entire left arm was engulfed in flames. Alecto Carroll let out a trembling wail before being engulfed by flames seconds later. Meanwhile, the instigator, little Ada Avery, was being bitten and swallowed by a serpent-like snake, crying out, "Lucius, save me," but Malfoy ignored him, swimming away under the protection of Goyle and Crabbe. All the mermaids in the village saw black smoke suddenly billowing from the building. They rushed to try and put out the fire, but to no avail. A large breach quickly burned through the wall, and Malfoy, Goyle, and Crabbe escaped, panting heavily with lingering fear. Sirius Black appeared before the 3, looking at them and saying, "Luckily, you're still alive." Malfoy turned around, glaring venomously at Sirius, and said, "I certainly won't die before you do. Wait until you survive the 3rd project, Lucius." Sirius sneered. "I'll be waiting for you in the 3rd project, and you won't be so lucky then." After Sirius left, Malfoy collapsed backward, his consciousness fading completely before he felt only a secret relief at surviving, and an even greater despair of utter helplessness. Of the 9 Death Eaters, 6 had died in the first 2 projects. How were they going to get through the 3rd? In the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, Amicus Carroll was magically frozen in his chair, sitting motionless. After being captured for attacking Ralph, he had been imprisoned here by Mad-Eye Moody and interrogated by the Aurors. Minister Fudge strode into the room, glancing at the blood-covered Carlo with disgust. "What did you find out?" he asked. "Amicus Carlo is the mastermind behind this whole thing," Delilah said. "He had an argument with Scamander before the first event, so he held a grudge and wanted to kill him." Hearing that Amicus wanted to kill Ralph, Fudge looked at him like he was a madman. He was courting death. Amicus, already covered in blood, still had a cold, sharp gaze. Meeting Fudge's fierce stare, he suddenly asked, "Connolly, how is my sister Alecto?" "Dead," Fudge said coldly. "The competition over there just ended. According to Malfoy, she was burned to death by Avery's fiend curse during the 2nd event." Hearing that his sister was dead, Amicus froze for a moment, then let out a piercing, beast-like roar. "Scamander, I will kill you, to avenge Alecto." But the next second, something happened that left Fudge speechless. A ball of golden flame erupted from Amicus's body, engulfing him in flames, wisps of gray smoke rising from his body, and emitting painful screams. Fudge was terrified, his mouth agape, and he took a few steps back in fear. He stammered, "My God, what's going on?" Amicus had only said he would kill Ralph, and then he was consumed by flames. Was that boy already this terrifying? Delilah quickly explained, "Minister, it's the contract of the Goblet of Fire. Warriors whose names are chosen by the Goblet of Fire must participate in the Triwizard Tournament, or they will suffer the backlash of the contract. Carlo has been in prison here, and he missed the second part of the Triwizard Tournament." Hearing Delilah's explanation, Fudge breathed a sigh of relief, but then he smelled the stench of burning human flesh. He gagged and quickly left the room. Fudge stepped into the corridor, taking deep breaths of fresh air. Before he could catch his breath, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw Umbridge running towards him, clutching a copy of the Daily Prophet, her face filled with panic. Fudge frowned. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Look, Minister." Umbridge handed him the newspaper. Fudge took it, glanced at the headline, and was immediately horrified. "Barty Crouch escapes from Azkaban? Minister Fudge's major blunder." Voldemort floated in midair, a bright, blazing golden flame suddenly erupting from his body, engulfing him at an unimaginable speed. Scorched by the flames, Voldemort felt excruciating pain all over his body, emitting a high-pitched, agonizing scream. Voldemort, of course, wouldn't be killed by the Goblet of Fire's covenant, but the thought of having to endure that pain again filled him with rage. He snarled, "Throw my name into the Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore, I'll avenge this sooner or later." After speaking, Voldemort looked at the woman beside him, his voice hoarse and cold. "Who else has died this time?" The woman paused, then whispered, "Ada Avery and the Carroll siblings are both dead." Voldemort was instantly enraged. He hadn't even been resurrected yet, and in just 6 months, 6 of his servants had died. And these servants were once the core members of the Death Eaters. If they continued to die like this, he might be left with nothing when he was resurrected. "There's one more thing, Master," the woman whispered. "What is it?" "The Daily Prophet has published news of Barty Crouch's escape," the woman said. "The Ministry of Magic should already know about this, and will soon send orders to conduct a large-scale manhunt for Crouch." "That's troublesome," Voldemort said in a hoarse voice. "We must kill Crouch before the Ministry does, or our secret will be exposed." "I'll go myself," the woman said. "No need. You stay by my side and help me resurrect." "Only with you. I completely trust you." Voldemort pondered for a moment and said, "Let that guy go. Hasn't he always said he wants to kill Barty Crouch himself?" "But their relationship, can he really do it?" the woman asked doubtfully. "Of course he can." Voldemort's lipless mouth twisted into a strange smile. "I've done the same thing myself, and that moment was the most wonderful enjoyment." Chapter 707 Fudge, Dolores. In late February, during the chilly early spring, renowned journalist Rita Skeeter published an article in the Daily Prophet, "Barty Crouch Escapes from Azkaban? Minister Fudge's Major Blunder." This article, like a bombshell, instantly detonated throughout the wizarding world. What is Azkaban? England's wizarding prison. It has been in operation since the 18th century, nearly 300 years, and has never had a prisoner escape before. Even the infamous escape of Peter Pettigrew 2 years ago was merely a journey to Azkaban, not an internal escape. Today, this prison, known as the Fortress of Iron, has seen an escapee, naturally causing a huge uproar. If one prisoner can escape, a second, a third can. And Azkaban holds countless criminals, including many vicious Death Eaters. If they all escaped, what a terrifying prospect it would be. The escaped convict Crouch, whose identity as a former director of international cooperation, also aroused public suspicion. Did such high-ranking officials in the Ministry of Magic actually know about the security loopholes in Azkaban, allowing him to escape successfully? People also noticed something particularly noteworthy. Crouch escaped in January, but the news only broke at the end of February. What happened during that time? The Ministry of Magic neither issued a warrant for Crouch's arrest nor informed the public, choosing instead to conceal the truth. It was like a tiger escaping from a zoo, but the zoo didn't announce it, leaving the public in unknown danger. This behavior undoubtedly fueled public outrage. Thus, throughout March, under Rita Skeeter's guidance, journalists and writers angrily denounced the Ministry of Magic's inaction and lack of transparency, directly targeting Fudge. Fudge was extremely busy and stressed, his mouth covered in blisters, but the more stressed he was, the more he enjoyed reading the newspapers and the criticisms directed at him. After Peter Pettigrew's escape and the Quidditch World Cup attack, only 6 months later, another prison break has occurred. We have to question Minister Fudge's governing ability. Now, how ridiculous that statement! With Minister Millicent Bagnow's retirement, the Ministry of Magic has officially entered the Fudge era, seems. The Ministry of Magic must now break free from the shackles of its rigid bureaucracy. It's time to open the windows, let in some fresh air, rid ourselves of all the red tape, and revitalize this creaky old bureaucratic machine. What does fresh air mean? Does it mean a new minister? Who wrote this? Naturally, it was her. Rita Skeeter. Fudge gritted his teeth, muttering the name, then angrily threw the cup in his hand. The cup hit the wall and shattered into pieces. Bang! 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 With a knock on the door, Fudge said impatiently, "Come in." Umbridge pushed the door open and entered. She first locked the door from the inside, then waved her wand to restore the broken glass. She then walked gracefully to Fudge's side and said in a coquettish voice, "Minister, what happened that made you so angry? What is it?" Fudge leaned back wearily in his chair and sighed. "That damned woman Rita Skeeter wrote another article criticizing me and even hinted at my resignation. I've already sent out a large number of Aurors and Dementors to capture Crouch. What else does she want? Is it meaningful to keep pestering me like this? Yes, you've done so many great things, why doesn't Skeeter report on them? But insists on reporting this one? It's clear she has ulterior motives," Umbridge said, naturally walking to Fudge's side and massaging his temples to relax him. "Have the Aurors found Skeeter?" Fudge asked. "Not yet," Umbridge shook her head. When the Aurors arrived at her house, it was already empty. "She must have other safe houses in England, that cunning woman," Fudge sneered. "We must find her, teach her a lesson, and make her change her tune. She's always touting some transparent Ministry of Magic in the newspapers. Those two words are contradictory. It can be transparent, or it can have a Ministry of Magic, but there's no transparent Ministry of Magic." She also said that the public has the right to know more about what's happening. Fudge roared, "No, the public only has the right to be ignorant." Fudge had been berating Rita for over 10 minutes before finally picking up his cup, taking a sip of tea to moisten his dry throat, and continuing to ask, "Any good news?" "Well, take a look at this report." Umbridge handed him a newspaper. Fudge took the newspaper and immediately grinned. The article in the newspaper wasn't criticizing him, but praising him. Since becoming Minister for Magic, Mr. Fudge has been a capable leader, greatly improving people's lives. He is truly a worthy minister. His greatness needs no further explanation. Mr. Fudge should receive a Merlin Medal. These words struck a chord with Fudge, who had indeed long desired a medal. He savored the report, smiling. "Well written. This reporter named Jacob is far superior to Rita Skeeter in terms of professional skills. From now on, I must see Jacob's articles first, understand?" "Yes, Minister," Umbridge replied sweetly. Fudge put down his newspaper, his eyes turning cold. "This political storm is raging. I have a feeling someone's manipulating public opinion behind the scenes. Tell the Auror office to capture Crouch before Easter and put an end to this farce." "Understood, Minister." Fudge's eyes were icy. "Once we catch Barty, I'll have the Dementors give him a passionate kiss." Fudge gripped his cup tightly. In his excitement, the cup wobbled, spilling water onto his lower body. Umbridge quickly bent down, knelt on Fudge's lap, and used her sleeve to wipe the spilled tea from his body. "Dolores, wipe with some paper." Fudge pulled some tissues from the table and handed them to Umbridge, who then resumed wiping him. In the distance, a small green beetle stood on a window, holding a tiny miniature camera, capturing the scene. From the beetle's perspective, it looked more like Umbridge was leaning over Fudge's lap, busy for a moment, then taking the tissue Fudge offered. As for what she was wiping, with that AV quality image, who could see clearly? But that was fine, she'd already thought of the future headlines. "Fudge, Dolores, don't use your mouth, use tissues." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 708 Avada Kedavra. Barty Crouch's escape from Azkaban sparked a heated debate throughout the wizarding world, and the event also affected the students at Hogwarts. The most obvious impact was the reappearance of a swarm of Dementors around the school, constantly hovering over Hogwarts, shrouding the sky in a thick, foggy haze. 2 Dementors also guarded the school gates, almost mirroring the capture of Peter Pettigrew the previous year. Dumbledore, at a dinner, solemnly warned everyone not to wander around at night, and especially not to leave the school for the Forbidden Forest, or they would be attacked by Dementors. When the headmaster mentioned this, most students unconsciously looked at Ralph. He revealed Barty Crouch's crime of harboring his son at home, leading to Crouch and his son's imprisonment in Azkaban. Everyone assumed Crouch's escape was for revenge. Ralph didn't think so, but he also hoped Crouch would come looking for him, so he could capture Crouch and interrogate him about his reasons for escaping Azkaban. Ralph even considered leaving school in a high-profile manner one day to attract Crouch's attention. Dumbledore spoke seriously at dinner, but the appearance of the Dementors did not cause panic or concern among the students. Last year, Sirius Black had taught them the Patronus charm, and although most of them hadn't learned it, it didn't stop them from feeling they had mastered the means to deal with the Dementors. Some students even stood a little distance from the school gate, holding their wands and shouting pop-tops of protection to attack the Dementors. Their wands could only produce some white mist, but that was enough to excite them. This reckless behavior was quickly discovered by Professor McGonagall, who caught them and then locked them in a room with Peeves as punishment. As a result, no one dared to provoke the Dementors anymore. The appearance of the Dementors also had a bad effect. The outdoor practical classes on defense against the dark arts were cancelled. The young wizards could no longer go to the Forbidden Forest with Moody and could only stay in the classroom to learn magic, which greatly dampened everyone's enthusiasm for class. At that moment, Moody, who was standing in the classroom explaining the unforgivable curse, looked at the distracted young wizards, swirled his magic eye around, and suddenly asked, "Miss Abbott, where was I?" Hannah hurriedly stuffed the newspaper in her hand into her bag, stood up tremblingly, scratched her head for a long time, and stammered, unable to say a word. Professor Moody pointed at Ralph and asked, "Mr. Scamander, you tell her." Ralph closed his Ravenclaw notebook, stood up, and replied, "You just mentioned the killing curse, Avada Kedavra, which originates from Aramaic, an official language of the ancient Persian Empire." "That's right," Moody said. "So there's a long-standing rumor that the killing curse was invented by Darius, who used the Avada Kedavra to assassinate the tyrant Xerxes I. He's the earliest recorded wizard to die under the killing curse." Moody's demonic eye fixed on Hannah, and he said gruffly, "Miss Abbott, did you remember that? From now on, please read the newspaper after class." Hannah blushed and quickly apologized to Mad Eye. This little incident brought everyone's attention back to the lesson. Moody limped toward the podium and announced loudly, "Next, I'm going to demonstrate the Avada Kedavra curse." He opened the podium drawer, took out a large glass jar, and pulled out a rat from it. The rat was as big as a kitten, with deathly pale skin, and looked utterly disgusting. Moody released the rat, which immediately darted away, but Mad Eye was faster. He raised his wand and roared, "Avada Kedavra!" A blinding green light flashed, so bright it made everyone squint. The rat, which had been jumping around just moments before, was now lying motionless on its back on the table, clearly dead. A collective gasp filled the classroom. Some students screamed, and others fell off their chairs. No one felt any sympathy for the rat's death. Everyone was simply terrified by the green light. Was this Avada Kedavra? Moody held the dead rat by the tail, dangling it in midair to show the students, "Look at this rat, there are no wounds on it. That's what Avada Kedavra is like. When it kills an animal, it doesn't harm the body, but attacks the soul directly. What's even more terrifying is that there's no antidote to the killing curse. Anyone struck by the green light will die," Moody said calmly. "Of course, so far, only one person has escaped this death, Harry Potter," the students whispered among themselves, while Susan raised her hand boldly and asked, "Professor Moody, have you ever killed anyone with Avada Kedavra?" Moody was silent for a moment, then finally nodded and said, "Yes, Professor. Isn't Avada Kedavra the unforgivable curse?" Justin asked, puzzled. "Most of the time it's the unforgivable curse. Using it on a human would land you in a lifetime in Azkaban," Moody explained solemnly. "But in times of war, the killing curse becomes a very useful spell. For example, during Grindelwald's reign, wizards were permitted to use Avada Kedavra when fighting his henchmen, the Liches, and during the Wizarding Wars more than a decade ago, Barty Crouch, then serving in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, issued an order legalizing the use of the unforgivable curse against Death Eaters by Aurors. So, when I was permitted, I used Avada Kedavra to kill dark wizards, and more than one." Moody's voice was icy cold. He said in a deep voice, "I still remember the first time I used the killing curse. I had only recently become an Auror when a dark wizard killed my companion, beheading him. His death ignited a violent hatred within me, and I used Avada Kedavra to kill him." Moody looked at the now silent students, his expression somewhat ferocious. "Before that, I was just like you, unable to cast Avada Kedavra. Even if I chanted this spell, at most I'd only make someone bleed from the nose. But at that moment, my anger helped me unleash the spell and kill the enemy. What drives the killing curse is less powerful magic and more hatred." Moody's voice deepened. "I hope you will never feel that emotion, and never use Avada Kedavra, but we must accept that dark wizards will use this magic," Moody said gravely. "So next, I will teach you how to deal with the killing curse, how to survive its attacks." Chapter 709 Wild Moody. The students were excited to hear that Professor Moody was going to teach them how to deal with the Avada Kedavra curse. Was this old geezer, this old Auror finally going to pull out his trump card and pass it on? The students eagerly grabbed their quills, ready to jot down Moody's invaluable experience in their notebooks. Under the expectant gazes of the young wizards, Professor Moody cleared his throat and solemnly said, "The killing curse has no antidote. If you get hit by it, you'll die. So the best way to deal with it is to dodge that deadly green light during combat and avoid being hit." These words caused a stir among the students. Avoiding the Avada Kedavra curse? That's perfectly reasonable, like needing to eat when you're hungry, everyone knows that. But who can actually dodge it during combat? Everyone stared at Moody in disbelief. They had expected that as the most renowned Auror of all time, he would surely offer profound insights, but instead, he uttered such utterly useless nonsense. Moody seemed to know what they were thinking. He looked at them calmly and said, "You think no one can do it, don't you?" "Yes, Professor Moody," Susan said, her face full of disbelief. "No one can escape Avada Kedavra in battle." Many students nodded in agreement. Moody's enchanted eye turned and stared at Susan. Susan thought Professor Moody was about to get angry, but instead, he suddenly laughed. However, his laughter only made him look more sinister, especially his scarred face, which appeared particularly distorted and bizarre. "You don't believe me, but as far as I know, one of the students here has demonstrated this ability in battle multiple times." Hearing Moody's words, everyone exchanged glances. Soon, some reacted, looking towards the first row, and the rest of the students also realized what he meant and looked at Ralph. Everyone had seen Ralph fight other wizards, most recently during the Tree Wizard tournament when he faced an ambush from Death Eaters. Ralph did indeed seem to demonstrate similar dodging skills. Scamander, why don't you demonstrate for everyone?" Moody called on him. Ralph had no choice but to stand up and slowly walk towards the podium. Once he was in place, Professor Moody whispered, "Child, I will cast some spells on you, but the danger is all within a controllable range, so don't worry." Ralph nodded slightly. Moody swung his wand, a red beam of light shooting from its tip, which Ralph easily dodged. Immediately afterward, several more spells came flying. Ralph's feet seemed rooted to the ground, not moving an inch, but his upper body swayed constantly, dodging each spell. The scene resembled Tyson's pendulum-like dodges in a boxing match, extremely rhythmic and impactful. As Moody's wand-swinging frequency suddenly increased, the number of spells also increased. They crisscrossed in the air, like dozens of arrows shot from a powerful bow, a dizzying array of sights. Ralph's feet finally began to move. He twisted and turned, dodging and weaving through the streaks of light, floating and darting back and forth, without a single spell striking him. This thrilling scene left the young wizards speechless. They looked at Ralph with the same as they looked at Merlin, utterly astonished and adoring, utterly awe-inspiring. "Did you all see that?" Moody finally stopped his attack, saying with satisfaction, "To dodge the Avada Kedavra curse with mere nimble footwork is not as impossible as you think. Can we learn it, Professor Moody?" Justin asked impatiently. The other students also looked on with eager anticipation. Of course, Moody nodded. Footwork training is the most practical skill in modern wizarding combat, and a course every Auror must take. I will teach you everything. Of course, this skill requires a lot of practice, sometimes even requiring legitimacy. It's not easy to master, Moody said with a nostalgic look. When I was young, I often dodged enemy spells like Scamander, even more nimbly and with more flamboyant movements. This was very effective at undermining an enemy's confidence and gaining a psychological advantage. Professor Moody, why don't you do that anymore? Macmillan asked curiously, Have you found a better way to deal with it? Obviously. Moody glanced at him, raised his wooden prosthetic leg, and said gruffly, because my leg is broken. Macmillan wanted to ask Moody if his leg was broken because he always liked to dodge enemy spells and was too sarcastic. But he didn't dare ask. He was afraid that if he said too much, the enraged Moody would also break his leg. Besides dodging, there's another way to resist Avada Kedavra, using a physical barrier to block the attack, Moody said, beckoning to Ralph. Kid, cast Avada Kedavra on me. Ralph raised an eyebrow. Professor, are you sure? He had studied dark magic with the Hufflepuff system 1,000 years ago, and the Avada Kedavra he cast could really kill. Come on, Moody said. I'm not so old that I can't handle a killing curse. Ralph had no choice but to raise his wand, aiming it at Moody's chest, and shout, Avada Kedavra. A green light flashed, and Moody immediately swung his wand. A table flew from the corner, blocking his way, and then shattered into pieces under the Avada Kedavra curse. You all saw that, right? Moody turned to the students and said, no magic, including defensive spells like the ironclad charm, can stop Avada Kedavra, but physical objects can. So, if you can't dodge Avada Kedavra, hide behind an obstacle or summon an object to shield yourself. Anyway, Moody suddenly roared, startling the entire class. Don't be stupid enough to stand still and try to tank Avada Kedavra with spells like Expelliarmus or Protective Armor. That's incredibly foolish. You'd be dead if you encountered a sane dark wizard. The students quickly grabbed their quills and jotted down Mad-Eye's words in their notebooks. Moody, leaning on his cane, trudged down from the podium. He shouted, all right, now it's your turn. Students, pair up and practice casting Avada Kedavra on each other. Remember, follow my instructions, try to dodge the attacks as much as possible, and don't get hit by the green light. The students stared blankly at Professor Moody. So, they were going to be shooting Avada Kedavra at each other face to face? This teaching was too wild. Chapter 710 Rove withstands 3 shots single-handedly. Professor Moody, of course, couldn't actually have his students use Avada Kedavra in a shootout. While the young wizard's abilities might at most result in a nosebleed, what if they accidentally killed their opponent? Moody wouldn't dare gamble on that possibility. Besides, teaching students to use Avada Kedavra in class was illegal and punishable by imprisonment in Azkaban. Therefore, Professor Moody taught a special kind of magic. The spell fired was a green light, just like Avada Kedavra, but it only left green spots on the wizard, causing no harm. Using this magic was similar to Muggle practice with blank rounds, simulating the effect of Avada Kedavra without causing harm, and it wasn't illegal, a triple win. What the students had to do was improve their survivability by dodging and summoning physical obstacles under this impoverished version of Avada Kedavra. After the defense against the dark arts class, the lessons quickly spread throughout Hogwarts. Learning how to ward off the Avada Kedavra curse was something very cool in the eyes of young wizards, making defense against the dark arts class the most anticipated course. In the corridors, it was common to see 7 or 8 students shooting green lights at each other, chanting Avada Kedavra, and jumping around trying to dodge. You'd think this was Azkaban High School. Rolf's performance of dodging spells in class was also spread by Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students, leading many young wizards to ask him for tips. Rolf didn't really have any special techniques. Unlike Professor Moody, he relied on spider sense, or you could say a different kind of ultra instinct. Trying to learn from him would be a waste of time. With April approaching, the Easter holidays finally arrived. But this holiday wouldn't allow students to relax, because fourth-year students had an unprecedented amount of homework. The professors seemed to have conspired to use a sea of problems to keep everyone confined to the library, preventing them from doing anything else. When Professor McGonagall assigned them a 15-inch-long essay and 7 books on transfiguration, the students couldn't hold back any longer and began to complain loudly. Professor McGonagall explained sternly, "You'll soon be in 5th grade, facing OWL exams. This is to prepare you for the intensity of the next school year." Hearing that this intensity would be standard practice next year caused many students to consider repeating the year. At this point, the benefits of being a true wizard became apparent. While the professors didn't waive all the true wizards' homework, they reduced it by more than half. This extra time wasn't for the true wizards to rest, but specifically for preparing for the final event of the True Wizard Tournament. In the original timeline, the third event was a large maze where the true wizards not only had to deal with various magical creatures but also fight each other. Ralph didn't know if the competition details would change, but that didn't stop him from training Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur in combat inside the box. However, the four weren't training in one-on-one combat. Ralph directly withstood 3 gunshots. Standing in an open space, Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur positioned themselves at 3 points, each raising their wands towards the boy. Ralph used his movement skills to dodge the spells, deflecting those he couldn't avoid with his wand. As the spells multiplied, Ralph finally raised his arm, causing the surrounding temperature to plummet. Instantly, the water vapor in the air condensed into ice, forming a shield that protected the boy. As the spells struck the ice, they shattered into dust, instantly transforming into a large cloud of white mist that spread outwards, enveloping everyone. Standing in the mist, Hermione gripped her wand tightly, trying to dispel the fog, when she suddenly heard a sound ahead, along with a faint light. She immediately shifted to the left, attempting to avoid the spells, but the next second, she bumped into a soft embrace. Hermione tensed, turning her head to cast a spell in return. But Ralph had already grabbed Hermione's wand with one hand, snatched it away, and tapped it on the girl's forehead, suddenly laughing, "Such a simple feint, and you're fooled. Hermione, you're dead now." Hermione was immediately discouraged. She tried to take the wand back, but Ralph stretched out his hand and delivered a chop to her head. Hermione winced in pain, clutching her head and crouching on the ground. Not far away, Sherry summoned a gust of wind, dispersing the mist. Ralph immediately reached out, grabbed Hermione by the collar, pulled her up, and used her as a human shield in front of him. Sherry and Fleur, as expected, hesitated to cast spells on him for a moment. Hermione rolled her eyes at this, and was about to condemn this shameless behavior when Ralph teased, "Dead men can't talk." This remark made Hermione even more speechless. Hiding behind Hermione, Ralph raised his wand and fired a spell at Sherry, who immediately cast an armor spell on herself. However, the spell missed the armor spell. Instead, it suddenly burst into a dazzling, blinding light in midair. Fleur instinctively closed her eyes, then, sensing danger, snapped them open. But in an instant, the spell had moved away from Sherry, veered sharply, and was heading straight for Fleur. The streak of white light grazed past Fleur's ear, severing a strand of silver hair from her temple. Fleur stood frozen for a moment, then sighed. "Fine, I'm dead too." Hermione laughed gleefully. It seemed this fate wasn't only effective against her. Sherry regained her sight and saw Ralph walking towards her. She raised her wand and fired a spell at him. The two began attacking each other, the clanging of metal echoing across the open space. However, after a while, Sherry became exhausted, her attacks became less frequent and slower, and she was easily disarmed by Ralph. After the battle, Ralph explained the issues to the 3 girls, letting them digest the information before starting another fight. This time, Ralph incorporated the unforgivable curse, the imperious curse, that Professor Moody had been teaching them recently. Not long after, Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur were defeated again. Looking at the 3 girls completely controlled by his imperious curse, Ralph's lips curled into a slight smile. "Now, what should I have you do?" he said. Chapter 711 Twin Wand Core Magic Wand. The imperious curse, one of the 3 unforgivable curses, is an extremely powerful and evil form of dark magic. Once successfully cast, the cursed person is under the caster's control, acting according to the caster's wishes. Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur are now completely under Ralph's control. They do whatever he tells them to do. Of course, this isn't absolute. If the cursed person's willpower is strong enough, they can break free of the caster's control. Ralph is now waiting for Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur to forcefully break free of the imperious curse through their own willpower. This is the purpose of casting the curse on them, to increase their resistance to the imperious curse, so that they will be able to resist if controlled by an enemy using the imperious curse again. However, with their willpower, they are clearly not strong enough to break free of the boy's imperious curse, and they stand there like 3 real-life toys. Ralph, having nothing better to do, looks at the controlled Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur, and suddenly a wicked sense of amusement arises within him. He decides to play with them and satisfy his daring desires. So, one after another, Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur did the most unusual things. Sherry spread her arms, imitating an owl, and made a coo-coo sound. Hermione, holding 2 handkerchiefs, started dancing the Yanko, and even sang in a perfect Parisian accent, "The lasso-wielding man, you are mighty and strong." Fleur performed the splits and a series of other difficult gymnastic moves, her body indeed as Gabrielle had described, flexible and elastic, leaving Ralph in awe. Just then, Gabrielle, carrying a package, came running excitedly towards them, shouting, "Ralph, the owl brought you something." She ran and shouted, initially cheerful and happy, but when she reached them, she saw this bizarre scene. The little girl froze on the spot, and after a long while, she asked blankly, "What are you doing?" Gabrielle clearly remembered her sister saying that they were going to train for the True Wizard tournament, but what were you doing? Singing, dancing, and even doing the splits? Were you sure you were doing serious training? Nothing, Ralph laughed. "I've controlled your sister and the others with magic," he quickly explained, and Gabrielle let out a long "oh," blinked her sly eyes, and asked again to confirm. Are they really controlled by you?" Ralph nodded. Gabrielle pondered for a moment, then suddenly glared at Ralph, dissatisfied. "You've used magic to control them, and all you're doing is making them do this boring thing." Ralph crossed his arms, raised his eyebrows, and asked, "Then what else can I make them do?" "Of course, very, very bad things, like," Gabrielle revealed her wicked smile, tiptoed, and whispered in the boy's ear, "Didn't you say you had a lot of homework for Easter? Let them do it for you. You can use the time you saved to play with me." Ralph couldn't help but twitch his lips. This was what Gabrielle meant by very, very bad things? That was truly wicked. Gabrielle rolled her eyes, then focused her gaze on the ponytail-wearing girl she had designated as her lifelong nemesis. She planned to take this opportunity to take down Sherry's hateful ponytail, tie her hair into an ugly bun, and then use a quill pen to draw a few sniffles on her cheeks. Ralph seemed to know Gabrielle's thoughts and warned her, "You'd better not get any bad ideas, or I won't be able to save you when Sherry wakes up." "I'm not afraid of her at all." Gabrielle stuck out her tongue at Ralph and held out her hand. "Give me a quill." Ralph waved his wand, conjuring a quill, and handed it to Gabrielle, then quietly lifted the imperious curse on Sherry. Gabrielle, unaware of this, excitedly took the quill, ran to Sherry, stood on tiptoe, and pointed the quill at her cheek. Just as Gabrielle was about to put pen to paper, Sherry suddenly woke up, staring at Gabrielle, who was so close, narrowing her bright eyes, and abruptly frowning, saying, "What are you doing?" Gabrielle jumped in fright, her arm hanging in midair, stammering, "Sherry, you're awake." "Haha, I didn't do anything, I just wanted to wake you up." Sherry glanced at the quill pen so close to her, and Gabrielle cried out, quickly pulling her hand back. Her eyes darted around, realizing something was wrong, and she turned to run. But after only 2 steps, Sherry used magic to freeze her in place. Sherry walked slowly to Gabrielle, took the quill, waved it in front of her, and asked, "You were trying to draw something on my face, weren't you?" Gabrielle forced a smile and said, "No, I wasn't." Ralph grinned mischievously. "She wanted to draw a niffler." Gabrielle glared at the disloyal boy who had betrayed her, and said fiercely, "You wait, she also wanted to draw a bowtrickle," Ralph added, adding insult to injury. Gabrielle quickly begged for mercy. "I'm sorry, I won't do it again." Sherry smiled sweetly, drew a menacing niffler on Gabrielle's face, then broke the spell and let her go. Gabrielle covered her cheek and hurriedly ran towards the cabin, seemingly to wash her face. Ralph laughed gleefully, then bent down to pick up the package Gabrielle had just brought. Shirley leaned closer and asked, "What's this?" "It's from Berlin, Germany, and it has Grigorovich's mark," Ralph said. "It should be a one from Karin." He opened the package, and sure enough, there were ones inside, more than a dozen in total. Shirley picked up a wand at random, stared at it intently, and noticed a note on it. She read, 13.5 inches long, made of mahogany. A flock of birds. The mahogany wand made a loud bang, like a pistol firing, and a flock of small birds flapped their wings and flew out from the wand head. Sherry was amazed by the power and asked curiously, "Is this the wand you were talking about, the one that can fight Voldemort?" "That's right," Ralph nodded. "The cores of these wands are the same you would as Voldemort's. They all come from foxtail feathers, making them twin cores. Wands with twin cores have the property of not killing each other. When wizards attack each other, all their spells will be nullified, and a special flashback charm will be generated, causing one wand to replay the spell it previously cast. In the original timeline, Harry escaped the resurrected Voldemort thanks to twin cores. Over the years, Ralph had often tempted Fox with delicious food, then secretly plucked its feathers. Besides making quills, he had Corin make ones from the collected feathers. Looking at the wands, Ralph exclaimed excitedly, "With these, we can go toe-to-toe with Voldemort." Chapter 712 Lucid Dream. As a weapon against Voldemort, the twin core wands were effective against him before Tom switched to the U-wand. Ralph had made over a dozen, intending to give one to each of his closest associates, just in case Voldemort caused them trouble. So, he pulled several wands from the pile and handed them to Sherry, whispering, "Keep them on your person. If you encounter Voldemort, use these to fight him. They could save your life in a critical moment." Ralph certainly wouldn't let that happen, but he had to be cautious. After all, better safe than sorry. Sherry took the wand, nodded seriously, and whispered, "I understand. Oh, and I also had Professor Dumbledore to make a few portkeys, which I put in the left drawer of the study," Ralph whispered. "Later, take 3 portkeys and give 1 each to Hermione and Fleur. You both need to carry them with you during the Triwizard Tournament." Sherry immediately tensed up upon hearing this. "You think there will be danger?" "There definitely will be danger," Ralph said seriously. "The third project is Voldemort's last chance to fish in troubled waters. That day, there will definitely be a major upheaval, just like the night of the Quidditch World Cup final. In the original timeline, Voldemort used Barty Crouch Jr. to switch the Triwizard Cup, turning it into a portkey, ultimately taking Harry with him and causing Cedric's death. Now, although Barty Crouch Jr. is imprisoned, Voldemort clearly has other accomplices helping him carry out various conspiracies. He won't miss that golden opportunity. Ralph held the slightly cold hand of the girl with the ponytail and gently rubbed it, softly saying, "Shirley, if you encounter any danger to your life, abandon the competition and immediately use the portkey to escape. It will lead you to the principal's office." Shirley nodded vigorously, hugging Ralph's arm tightly, and instructed, "You must be careful too." "I will." Ralph smiled warmly, raising his left hand to gently pinch her delicate cheek, asking, "How does it feel to be under the Imperious Curse?" "It's very strange," Shirley hesitated, slowly saying, "My mind went blank, all thoughts and worries vanished, leaving only a hazy, intangible joy. In that state, I heard a voice commanding me to do things, and then my body moved involuntarily. The Imperious Curse is truly terrifying." "It is terrifying, otherwise, why would it be called the Unforgivable Curse?" Ralph sighed softly, then continued to impart his experience. "So, you must learn to resist the commands that voice gives you. As long as your will to resist is strong enough, you can break free from the Imperious Curse, but that voice is like a thought that arises in my mind." Shirley frowned her delicate eyebrows and sighed, "I can't, and can't even remember to, resist it. The key is that you must realize that it's not a thought of your own, but a command imposed on you by someone else," Ralph said seriously. "In short, you must realize immediately after being afflicted by the Imperious Curse that you have been controlled." Shirley looked up and pondered seriously. Ralph didn't rush her, waiting quietly while reaching out to smooth a strand of hair behind her ear. "But that's hard to do, isn't it?" Sherry finally came to her senses and whispered, "It's like a dream. No matter how bizarre the dream, the dreamer believes it's real and doesn't realize it's a dream at all." "You hit the nail on the head." Ralph looked at the girl with the ponytail with admiration and grinned, "Your description is accurate. The Imperious Curse is actually a passive dream, and breaking free from the Imperious Curse is entering a lucid dream." "A lucid dream?" Sherry asked in confusion. "What's that?" "A lucid dream is when the dreamer remains conscious while asleep," Ralph explained. "In a lucid dream, you can have the thinking and memory abilities you have when you're awake, and you can even control the dream. The Imperious Curse and dreaming are similar in that you're both in an illusion without realizing it, and breaking free from the Imperious Curse and a lucid dream are essentially the same thing. If you can master lucid dreaming, you can apply that same principle to the Imperious Curse and realize you're being controlled." Shara gave a thoughtful "oh," and then asked, "Ralph, do you know how to have a lucid dream?" "I know," Ralph chuckled. "Shall I teach you?" "Sure," Sherry asked expectantly. "Right now?" "Not now," Ralph shook his head. "Whether it's a lucid dream or any other kind of dream, since it's a dream, you need to sleep." It's still broad daylight. The boy reached out and grabbed Sherry's ponytail, which was hanging in front of her chest. He gently ran his fingers through the ends of her hair, sniffed it, rolled his eyes, and suddenly leaned close to her face, smiling. "How about this? Come to my room tonight, and I'll guide you step by step through how to enter a lucid dream." The girl with the ponytail blushed instantly. She glanced furtively at Hermione and Fleur, then gently shushed him with her finger, signaling him to be quiet. "Don't be afraid," Ralph chuckled. "They're both under the influence of the Imperious Curse, They can't hear our conversation." Sherry finally relaxed, took a deep breath, and blushed, saying, "I'm not going to your room. Just tell me the method, and I'll practice in my own room tonight." "That won't do," Ralph said seriously. "Practicing lucid dreaming alone is dangerous. You might enter a second or third layer of dreams within your own dream," he continued, making up stories. "At that point, I'll need to infiltrate your dream and wake you up. Otherwise, you won't wake up and will be forever trapped in the lost realm." Sherry looked at him with suspicion. She felt that Ralph was exaggerating to trick her into going to his room that night, letting her stay overnight, and then finding ways to bully her. "Don't look at me like that, like I'm a pervert," Ralph chuckled, flicking her smooth forehead with his finger. "I really just want to teach you lucid dreaming. I have no other bad intentions. If you're worried, I can come to your room tonight." Shirley gave Ralph a charming but harmless glare. "Is there a difference?" "I don't think so," Ralph grinned, pulling Shirley into his arms and holding her tightly. "Not here. What if we get seen?" Shirley said, but her resistance was merely symbolic, weak and powerless. Ralph cupped her face in his hands and kissed her moist, red lips. The girl let out a soft moan and wrapped her arms tightly around his neck. A moment later, Ralph released Shirley, leaned close to her ear, and whispered softly, "Come to my room tonight. I'll teach you lucid dreaming. I'm sure you'll have a beautiful dream." "Okay." Shirley licked her lips, savoring Ralph's touch, then gazed at him and said, "But you have to agree to one condition." "What condition?" "I also want to use the Imperious Curse to control you for a while." "What do you want me to do?" "I want," Shirley blinked her mischievous eyes and smiled sweetly, "I want you to run 10 laps in the box, so you won't have the energy to bully me like you do now tonight." Chapter 713 Hagrid's Return. Throughout the Easter break, Ralph worked in a two-shift system. During the day, he sparred with the three girls, and at night, he and Sherry delved into lucid dreaming and the Imperious Curse in bed. He was incredibly busy. Of course, the results were significant. Although Ralph could defeat the three girls each time, their increasingly skillful combined attacks were becoming more challenging. He had to gradually increase his suppressed strength to deal with them. It can only be said that under his daily hard work, Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur had indeed made considerable progress. Amidst this busyness, the Easter break ended, the students welcomed the summer term, and Hagrid, who had been absent for months, finally returned. That day, after a herbology class, Hufflepuff and the Gryffindor students parted ways and headed towards the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Before they even reached the cabin, they saw a tall figure standing in front of it, waiting for them. Since Rita Skeeter's report, Hagrid had vanished without a trace, leading many students to believe he had been expelled or imprisoned in Azkaban. His reappearance surprised the young wizards, who huddled together in small groups, whispering amongst themselves. The chatter grew louder as the Ravenclaw students arrived. Finally, one student couldn't contain himself and raised his hand, asking, "Hagrid. Professor Glapland, where's Professor Glapland? Why isn't she teaching us?" This was a rather impolite question. Professor Glapland was merely a substitute teacher. Hagrid was the actual professor of conservation of magical creatures, so his teaching was perfectly justified. However, comparisons are inevitable, and compared to Hagrid, who had taught Blasdale for 6 months, Glapland, the substitute teacher, was far more popular and beloved by the students. Hagrid knew this, and instead of being angry, he carefully explained, "Professor Glapland had some urgent business, and returned to the Hudiri Islands. I'll be filling in temporarily." His words were both humble and poignant, and the kind, honest, and incredibly warm-hearted Hufflepuff students applauded Hagrid, welcoming him back. Hagrid was deeply moved, wiping his teary eyes with his dirty handkerchief. When the bell rang, Hagrid led the students towards the pumpkin patch, arriving at a pile of open cardboard boxes. The students initially thought it was another brood of baby snails, and their hearts sank. But upon closer inspection, they realized it wasn't snails at all, but a group of fluffy little creatures. They had long noses, flat, shovel-like front claws, and were covered in black downy fur, quite peculiar. Ralph and Sherry exchanged a glance and tacitly removed their shiny items and put them back in their wallets. "This is a niffler," Hagrid said, clapping his hands after the students had gathered. "They're usually found in mines. They like shiny things." Before Hagrid could finish, a niffler suddenly leaped up and landed on Hannah. She screamed in fright, forgetting all about her elegance, and ran away with her school bag. The niffler didn't linger. It jumped onto a wooden post and started playing with a hair clip studded with rhinestones. Hannah touched her hair and cried out, "My hair clip has been stolen." Neville immediately rushed to the Niffler's rescue, but the Niffler used its hind paws to push off, leaping onto another student's arm and stealing a watch. The Niffler continued to weave through the crowd, twisting and turning, and not only did they fail to catch it, they also lost 7 or 8 items. The scene was extremely chaotic. The Niffler was a master of escape. There was no way they could catch it like this. Rove, a Niffler expert, took a gold coin from his pocket. It gleamed in the sunlight. The Niffler, captivated by its sight, pounced on Rove, snatching the gallon. But the next second, the gallon transformed into a rope. The Niffler frantically tried to escape, changing its course several times, but was always caught by the ever-present rope around its ankle. The Niffler leaped high, grabbing a branch with its claws, attempting to flip over onto the tree, only to be violently pulled to the ground. Rove then sharply flicked his wrist, the rope ending in a beautiful arc, like fishing, pulling the Niffler back. Sherry bent down, grabbed the Niffler, and lifted it upside down, shaking it vigorously like a blanket. The next second, a large number of glittering objects fell from the Niffler's pouch, crashing to the ground. The students rushed forward to retrieve their belongings. The Niffler growled angrily, clearly hurling very harsh insults. However, when the girl with the ponytail reached out and scratched the Niffler's fluffy belly, it immediately stopped barking and instead let out a comfortable, happy purr. "Everyone, hide your shiny things so the Nifflers don't steal them," Hagrid shouted. "Next, we're going to play a little game with these Nifflers." He pointed to a large patch of newly turned soil. "I've buried some gold coins in the ground. Whoever picks the Niffler that digs up the most gold coins will get a reward." Hearing that there were gold coins buried in the ground, the little wizards, who had been a little unhappy just moments before, rushed towards Hagrid, as if being a second too late would mean missing out on the best Niffler. Ralph also chose a half-grown Niffler and threw it into the ground. It began burrowing in and out of the soil like a fish in water. After finding the gold coins, the Nifflers would hurriedly return and put them in the students' hands. Ralph held a handful of gold coins, knowing they were the goblins' coins. These gold coins were created by goblins using magic. Although they looked and felt very similar to ordinary galleons, they disappeared after a few hours. Therefore, the Nifflers didn't hesitate and gave them directly to the wizards. However, the young wizards seemed unaware of this and were still working enthusiastically, some even secretly hiding the gold coins in their pockets. At this moment, Hagrid approached and asked uncertainly, "Was the lesson alright?" "Yes," said Ralph. Everyone really liked the Nifflers. Hagrid breathed a sigh of relief. He was afraid that his prepared lesson still wouldn't be well received by the students. A Niffler ran over and placed a handful of gold in Sherry's hand. She took out some freeze-dried food from her pocket as a reward and then whispered, "Hagrid, welcome back." "Thank you." Hagrid smiled. "I didn't want to come back, but Professor Dumbledore came to the Forbidden Forest to find me and invited me back. He said he had something for me to do, so I had to come back." "What is it?" Ralph asked curiously. "Dumbledore asked me to help design the third event of the Triwizard Tournament." Hagrid glanced around, lowered his voice, and said, "You guys sneak out tonight. I'll show you what the competition is about." Chapter 714 The Twins' Warning. Hagrid had been teaching the Magical Creatures Protection class for a year and a half, and if you asked which class all the students were satisfied with, it would undoubtedly be today's class. It wasn't that his teaching was particularly good, but rather that those gleaming gold coins were simply too appealing. The Niffler, acting as a treasure hunter, instantly replaced the Phoenix as everyone's favorite. Justin was even reluctant to return the Niffler to Hagrid, and couldn't help but ask, "Professor Hagrid, can I buy this Niffler as a pet?" "No." Hagrid shook his head, smiling slightly. "An animal like the Niffler would destroy your Hufflepuff's common room, and Professor Sprout wouldn't allow it." Not only Justin, but many students looked disappointed. "Alright, let's count the coins and see who wins the competition," Hagrid announced loudly. The students took out all the coins they had earned, and after Hagrid finished counting, Neville emerged victorious, becoming the champion. As a reward, Hagrid gave Neville a set of practice questions on magical creature theory, and he was so happy he almost cried. The other students laughed gleefully, but their joy was short-lived. Hagrid warned, "These coins are fine to take. They're just imp coins and will disappear in a few hours." Everyone was speechless. Had they spent the entire class just fooling around? The coins might be fake, but the Niffler's treasure hunting ability was undeniable. With these, you could find money anywhere. The Niffler quickly became a sensation at Hogwarts, with many students asking where they could buy one. At dinner time, Ralph sat at the Hufflepuff table and saw Justin and Macmillan whispering together. A moment later, the two men sneakily approached. Justin lowered his voice and asked, "Ralph, we just bought 2 Niffler pups, but they're not eating. Can you help us figure out what's wrong?" Ralph nodded in agreement, secretly surprised. "Could you really buy Nifflers at Hogwarts? They really sell everything." Justin glanced up at the faculty seats, making sure the professors weren't looking their way, before quietly slipping a black cub into Rove's arms. Rove looked at the cub, and almost couldn't believe his eyes. A streamlined, rounded body with no sharp corners or flat spots, bright eyes, a long, thin belly. This was a Niffler. Was it a mink? Rove held the Niffler, this creature resembling a mink, and examined it closely. Suddenly, a notification popped up in his mind. Mink cub detected. Side quest triggered. Help the mink treat its skin disease. Reward: listen closely. Your hearing will be as amazing as a mink's, able to hear very subtle sounds within 300 meters. Quest incomplete. How is it? Justin asked impatiently. It's sick, Rove said, pointing to the mink's mouth and eyes. Look here, there are round bumps and ring-shaped areas of hair loss, covered with grayish-white scales. This is a typical skin disease caused by Microsporin canis, a sick Niffler, Justin exclaimed. Then we're losing money buying one for 10 galleons. If you're buying a Niffler, you are indeed losing money, Rove laughed. You're losing 10 galleons each. Justin and Macmillan exchanged bewildered glances. Rove didn't keep them in suspense, stating bluntly, "This isn't a Niffler at all, it's a mink." "Impossible," Macmillan exclaimed in astonishment. "I've seen minks in my garden, aren't they snow white?" "That's right." Rove plucked a hair from the mink, sniffed it lightly, and said disdainfully, "It smells like cheap dye, and another thing, minks only cost 5 galleons each at the Fantastic Beasts shop, and you're selling them for 10 galleons, Rove laughed. "Who's so greedy as to sell them to you?" "Gartry from Slytherin," Justin said. Macmillan gritted his teeth. "He's my cousin," Ralph shrugged. "Cheaters always start with their relatives. I'm going to confront him, that swindler." Macmillan stormed off toward the Slytherin table, Justin close behind. Once they were a distance away, Gabrielle approached, looking curiously at the groundhog, and asked, "Is its illness serious?" "Not too serious," Ralph, wanting to test her, asked. "Gabrielle, do you remember how I taught you to treat microsporidiosis?" The girl thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up. "Iodine tincture and Lysol, mix them in a 1:1 ratio and apply it to the affected area." "That's right," Ralph nodded in satisfaction, then opened the box, used the summoning charm to summon 2 vials of potions, and handed them to Gabrielle. "You can help it apply the medicine, me." Gabrielle excitedly took the vials and began to apply the medicine to the groundhog. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Ron whispered to Fleur about the Triwizard tournament and urged her to go for a night stroll that evening. Fleur agreed with anticipation. Looking at the girl's expression, Ron was secretly surprised. He remembered that the first time he asked Fleur to go for a night stroll, she was somewhat resistant, but unexpectedly, in just half a year, she had become addicted and increasingly aware of the benefits of night strolls. At the Gryffindor dining table, Harry picked up a piece of Norwegian sausage, took a bite, and whispered as he chewed, "Ron, I ran into Hagrid when I went into the Great Hall. He told us to come out tonight, and he'll take us to see the contents of the 3rd project." Ron was initially delighted, but quickly frowned and said, "Can we go out? It's very dangerous outside, there are Dementors everywhere, and we might even run into Crouch who escaped from prison." "It's okay, Hagrid is here," Harry said, "he'll definitely ensure our safety." "Hagrid might be able to ensure your safety outside the castle," a teasing voice suddenly rang out. Another voice continued, "But he certainly can't guarantee your safety inside the castle." Harry and Ron jumped in surprise, turning to see George and Fred. Harry asked, "What do you mean? You two haven't been out for a night stroll lately," George said with a grin. "Don't you know this great undertaking is facing a terrible contradiction?" "What contradiction?" "The professor's increasingly frequent patrols, and the students' growing yearning for freedom," Fred said quietly, sitting in his chair. "The other night we went out, and we encountered 4 professors along the way, something that's never happened before. It's definitely to keep an eye on Crouch," Ron said thoughtfully. "Perhaps," George shrugged. "But it's dealt a heavy blow to the night-hopping business, so, you two really need to be careful, little brother," Fred said, patting Ron on the shoulder. "Outside the castle isn't dangerous, But getting out without being spotted by the professors, that's going to be tough. Yeah, even the two of us have been spotted by Mad Eye several times, George chimed in. His evil eye is terrifying. It's okay, we'll wear invisibility cloaks, he won't see us, Harry said confidently. George and Fred exchanged a glance, then grinned mischievously. Good luck to you two. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 715 Harry and Ron Get Caught. In the dead of night, Ralph quietly rose and, like a wildcat at night, silently left his dormitory and entered the Hufflepuff common room. The entire room was unusually quiet, most of it shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the embers in the fireplace, flickering faintly. Ralph didn't rush out. He went to the fireplace, added another piece of wood, then sat on the sofa and took out a piece of parchment. He raised his wand and tapped the parchment lightly with the end, saying, Allahumma. The previously blank parchment suddenly appeared with many fine, spiderweb-like ink lines, which intertwined to form a map of Hogwarts Castle. Above the lines were many small ink dots, each marked with a name in tiny letters. These names were mainly concentrated in the 4 areas, that is, the dormitories of the 4 houses, making the scattered names outside the dormitories quite conspicuous on the map. Ralph looked at the map in his hand and quickly found several moving names: Snape, Moody, Filch, and Professor Sinistid of Astronomy. 3 teachers and a caretaker patrolled the castle. In all his years of nighttime scavenging, Ralph had never seen such a scene before. It was clear that, learning from Peter Pettigrew's experience, the school was extremely vigilant about the escaped Barty Crouch. This tight patrolling ensured the students' safety, but it wasn't so friendly to the noble cause of nighttime scavenging. Especially since Moody was among them, his magical eye able to see through the invisibility cloak. And neither Sherry nor Hermione had a Hogwarts map, they could easily be discovered by him. Ralph thought for a moment and decided to change his plans, going directly to Sherry and Hermione's dormitory to pick them up. He knew the exact location, he was familiar with the place. Lying on her bed with its canopies, Sherry was reading a magic book called Chalk's Magic. This book, written by Chalkbutt, was a textbook at Ivermony School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. She had specifically borrowed it from Marjorie, flipping through it in her spare time, intending to compare it with the Hogwarts textbooks to learn from their strengths and weaknesses. Out of the corner of her eye, the girl glanced at the clock. There was still half an hour until the appointed time, and she could soon leave the dormitory to meet up with Ralph and Hermione. Just then, the wallet hanging on the bedside table suddenly opened, and a piece of golden paper floated out, landing in front of the girl with the ponytail. Sherry frowned slightly, picked up the paper, and began to examine it. This was called magic paper, a Christmas gift Dumbledore had given Ralph that year. The boy kept one for himself and gave the other to her. Like a two-way mirror, magic paper allowed for remote communication. If one person wrote on the paper, the other person holding the paper could immediately see the content. The magic paper slowly revealed the word, window. Seeing the message Ralph had sent, Sherry didn't think much of it, reached out and turned off the magic lamp by the bedside, then drew back the curtains that blocked the light. She quietly got out of bed, put on a cloak, and walked to the windowsill. The girl reached the window, opened it, and the night's cold touch sent shivers down her spine. Sherry pulled her cloak tighter, leaned closer to the stone windowsill, and gazed longingly. She saw the empty square, the dark sky, countless endless stars, and Ralph. He rode a fire crossbow, hovering in midair not far away, waving vigorously at her with a broad smile. Seeing Sherry appear behind the window, Ralph spurred his broom and flew towards her. Shirley looked delighted, then suddenly remembered something. She quickly waved her wand, using magic to mute the sound, and turned to the boy, whispering, "Rolf, what are you doing here? Weren't we supposed to meet in the lobby on the first floor?" "The plan changed," Rolf explained with a smile. "I just checked the Hogwarts map and found several professors patrolling the castle. I was worried you and Hermione would be discovered, so I came here to pick you up." Rolf tilted his head and held out his hand. "Come on up." Shirley nodded, carefully climbed onto the window, took Rolf's hand, and stepped onto the fireboat. Once settled, she hugged the boy's waist tightly and said softly, "I'm ready, let's go." Rolf whistled softly, turned his broom, and flew towards the Gryffindor Tower. At the Gryffindor Tower, Harry and Ron tiptoed through the common room, climbed over the portrait hole, pushed aside the portrait of the fat lady, and slipped out. "Who is it?" the fat lady asked in a hoarse voice. "Who's there?" But Harry and Ron remained silent, hiding under their invisibility cloaks and moving quickly down the corridor, trying not to make a sound. However, as they passed a room, they suddenly heard shouts. Their hearts nearly leaped out of their chests, and they held their breath, cautiously peering through the crack in the door. Peeves was there, splashing paint on the wall while humming a Polish children's song. "I'm a painter, a master painter, I'll paint that new house, even prettier." Harry and Ron, realizing it was Peeves, became even more frightened and quickly moved away from the room, heading towards the nearby stairs. Once down the stairs, Harry whispered, "If Peeves finds out, we're doomed." "Yeah," Ron said nervously, "he's not someone to mess with. I heard from George and Fred that they have a map that shows the whole of Hogwarts, including all the intricate shortcuts and secret passages. Most importantly, it shows the movement of people in the corridors with little dots marked with names." Ron sighed. "If only we had that map, we could avoid everyone in advance." "Where's that map now?" Harry asked curiously. "It was stolen by Peter Pettigrew in their dormitory on Halloween 2 years ago," Ron said regretfully. Harry remembered. He remembered that night, all the students were alarmed and ended up sleeping in the Great Hall. Just as Harry was about to say something, he suddenly stepped onto a mischievous step, half his leg sinking into it. Ron bumped into Harry, fell with a thud, and rolled down the steps with a cry of pain. Harry tried to climb out of the trap, but his leg got stuck. He cried out urgently, "Ron, come save me." Ron stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He got up, his body aching, and limped over to Harry. Just as he was about to pull him out, a piercing voice rang out. "I just heard a scream. You naughty students, wandering around in the middle of the night. Tisk, 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 naughty, naughty, you'll be arrested." Ron looked terrified and quickly grabbed the invisibility cloak, covering himself and Harry with it. Peeves floated over. He didn't see anyone, but still excitedly shouted, "I know you're here. Come out now, or I'll call for help." Harry and Ron, of course, weren't going to come out. So Peeves yelled at the top of his lungs, "Students, don't sleep. Students, don't sleep." There on the 5th floor stairs, a moment later, Snape appeared at the top of the stairs, carrying an oil lamp. He asked coldly, "Peeves, what's going on?" "Students, Professor," Peeves said gleefully, "I heard their voices, right here." "Is that so?" Snape looked around, saw no one, and sneered, "Professor Moody, aren't you going to come and see? This is your area of expertise." Snape's words had barely left his lips when the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. Through a gap in his invisibility cloak, Harry saw Mad-Eye Moody, wearing an old traveling cloak and leaning on a cane, limping towards him. "What's wrong?" he asked gruffly. "Someone's used the disillusionment charm or the invisibility cloak to hide," Snape said. "I need your mystic eyes to take a look." Harry's heart pounded terribly. He silently prayed that Moody's mystic eyes wouldn't see him and Ron. But Moody only glanced around before walking over, finally stopping in front of the two. He bent down, unhesitatingly lifted the invisibility cloak, and asked gruffly, "Potter, Weasley, what are you two doing here in the middle of the night?" Snape stared at Harry, his dark eyes flashing, and said with a smile, "I think Potter and Weasley are probably on a date here. Haven't you read Rita Skeeter's article? They're a couple deeply in love." Chapter 716 The Burning Magic Ship. Ralph and Sherry, riding their flying broomsticks, arrived at Gryffindor Tower, easily found Hermione, and brought her out of her dormitory. Ralph fired a firebolt, carrying the two girls, and flew tilted towards the ground. But when they were about 10 meters above the ground, he suddenly stopped, halting the firebolt and hovering in midair. The momentum from the sudden stop caused Hermione to lurch forward and collide with Sherry, who in turn bumped into Ralph. Ralph could clearly feel two soft, fleshy shapes pressing against his back. The pressure from those soft, fleshy shapes created an unparalleled sense of being pushed against his back. He suppressed his burgeoning desires and asked, "Are you two all right?" Hermione steadied herself and shook her head, saying, "I'm fine, and you, Sherry?" Ralph turned his head and saw the girl with the ponytail clutching her chest. He asked with concern, "Did it hurt?" This direct question made the shy Sherry blush instantly. She gave the boy who was looking at her chest a light glare and said in a soft voice, "It doesn't hurt." Hermione, sitting in the back, couldn't see what was happening. She anxiously looked up and asked, "Sherry, Where did you hurt yourself? How could the girl with the ponytail answer truthfully, especially in front of Ralph? Her shyness deepened, and her cheeks turned as red as peach blossoms. I hurt my chin. It's nothing serious, Ralph raised an eyebrow with a half-smile. Seeing this, Sherry, half shy and half annoyed, reached out and pinched his waist to make him behave. Ralph grinned and grasped Sherry's small hand, gently stroking her smooth skin. I just heard screams coming from the castle, that's why I stopped abruptly, he asked. Did you two hear them? Hermione listened intently for a moment, then shook her head. I didn't hear anything, Sherry, did you? Me neither. Sherry pulled her hand away from Ralph's restless grasp, her voice trembling slightly. I'll look at the Hogwarts map. Sherry took out the parchment, and the three of them, in the soft moonlight, looked at the map. They were all quickly astonished. They saw Harry and Ron's names, and if that were all, Snape and Moody's names were next to them. The four of them were together. And the direction they were heading was clearly towards Professor McGonagall's office. Ralph thought for a moment, then said with a smug grin, Harry and Ron must have been caught out of the blue. Those screams were definitely from them. Hermione patted her chest thankfully. Luckily we didn't go down the stairs, or we might have been caught too. Yeah, Shirley nodded. Professor Moody's magic I can even see through the invisibility cloak. So what should we do now? Hermione asked. Never mind them, Ralph said. Let's go find Fleur first. They didn't go to rescue Harry and Ron, but continued riding their firebolts, arriving at the huge Boxburton's carriage. After waiting a moment, Fleur cautiously opened the door and quietly came out. The four of them reunited and crossed the meadow together, arriving at Hagrid's cabin. Ralph knocked on the door, and a low, grating bark immediately came from inside. You've finally come. Hagrid opened the door. Ralph, he stopped abruptly, staring at Ralph and the three girls behind him, speechless with surprise. Shirley, Hermione, and Ralph were practically inseparable. Hagrid knew that, but why was there another girl? Ralph introduced her. This is Fleur Delacour from Boxburton's. She's also one of the champions, so I brought her along. Hello, Mr. Hagrid, Fleur said politely. Hagrid glared at Fleur. Ever since his falling out with Madame Maxim, he had no fondness for Boxburton students. However, since she was Ralph's friend, Hagrid still invited Fleur to try some rock cakes. Fleur had already been warned by Ralph about the power of rock cakes, so she immediately declined. Hagrid, let's go see the third project now, Ralph said. The professors are checking very carefully tonight. We need to get back to our dorms early. We'll have to wait a little longer, Hagrid said, scratching his messy hair. I also told Harry and Ron, they should be here soon. Ralph, Shirley, and Hermione exchanged glances. Seeing this, Hagrid asked, what's wrong? You might not be able to wait. Ralph shrugged. What do you mean? Harry and Ron were caught by Snape and Professor Moody on the way, Ralph said, shrugging. They should be having tea in Professor McGonagall's office right now. Hagrid looked at Hogwarts Castle with a worried expression. He said with a frown, I'll take you to see the third project first, then we'll go to Professor McGonagall's office to find them. Let's go. Hagrid led Ralph and the others across the grass in the dark night to the Quidditch pitch. The pitch was no longer as flat and smooth as before. Instead, it was covered with countless long, low walls. These walls were intricate and winding, stretching out in all directions, looking like a maze. Not bad, right? Hagrid asked cheerfully. In another month, these walls will be 20 feet high, turning into a giant maze. A maze, Hermione exclaimed in surprise. Our third project is to navigate through a maze. Yes, Hagrid said excitedly. In the center of the maze, there's a trophy. Whoever navigates through the maze first and gets it will get full marks. Is it that easy? Fleur asked doubtfully. This didn't sound as difficult as the first two projects. Of course, that's not all, Hagrid said cheerfully. Various spells will be placed at various checkpoints in the maze, which you will need to dispel. Most importantly, Hagrid said proudly, I've also placed a whole bunch of adorable magical creatures in the maze to block your way. Hagrid went on and on, finally pulling a map from the pocket of his moleskin coat. This is the list of the types and locations of the magical creatures I've placed. I hope it will be of some help. Ralph took the map, took out his wand, and used a copying charm to make 4 copies of the map, distributing them to Sherry and the others. Alright, you should go back now, Hagrid said. I also need to find Professor McGonagall and clarify the situation with her, so that Harry and Ron can be spared punishment. Ralph put the map in his pocket. He was about to speak when he suddenly sensed something, abruptly turned around, and looked into the distance. Seeing the boy's action, Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur also turned around, instantly frozen in place. In their sight, they saw the Durmstrang ship moored on the Black Lake. At that moment, the ship was billowing black smoke, flames shooting into the sky. Chapter 717 Karkaroff's Escape. Under the cover of night, Durmstrang's massive ship transformed into a blazing inferno, wisps of black smoke billowing and churning into the gray sky. The terrifying sight caused Hagrid to gasp, his face pale. The fleeing Gorgon. How did that ship catch fire? He cried. Black flames. Ralph squinted, speaking softly. It seems the Dark Wizard used a fiend fire spell to deliberately set the ship ablaze. A Dark Wizard? Hagrid cursed viciously, anxiously saying, the fire is getting bigger and bigger. We have to put it out quickly. Hagrid, once the demonic flames spread, there's no way we can extinguish them with just a few of us. Ralph shook his head, looking at the already raging black flames. Rushing over there now won't help. Then what do we do? Hagrid asked frantically. We can't just do nothing, can we? Saving people is more effective than putting out a fire. Ralph turned to Hagrid and asked with unusual calm, where are the small boats the first-year students used to cross the lake? Hagrid hesitated for a moment, then pointed west and said, they're moored at the ferry over there. Hagrid, immediately bring those small boats to the vicinity of that magical ship, Ralph commanded gravely. Hermione, Fleur, you two go help. If any students jump into the lake, rescue them. Hearing the boy's words, the two girls, who had been frightened by the fiery ship, finally regained some composure, though they were still somewhat disoriented, staring at him with dazed eyes. Seeing this, Ralph reached out and pressed their heads down, gently stroking them with his healing hand, while admonishing them, remember, don't get too close to the magical ship. If you encounter students being burned by fiend fire, don't try to rescue them. In short, your safety comes first. Hermione and Fleur jolted awake at Ralph's touch on the head, finally fully waking up. They nodded vigorously and followed Hagrid towards the distant ferry. Ralph opened the black leather trunk and whispered, Shirley, immediately inform Dumbledore and tell him to come. The girl with the ponytail nodded and raised her wand, saying, Palm-tops of the guard. A dazzling silver unicorn emerged from the tip of the wand, landing beside Shirley. She whispered a few instructions, and the unicorn stamped its hooves and galloped away. Ralph took out a firebolt from the trunk and, together with Shirley, mounted it. But instead of taking off immediately, he turned around and whispered, Shirley, the arsonist might still be at school. You don't need to worry about anything else. Your only task is to examine the Hogwarts map and look for suspicious names. The girl with the ponytail stared into Ralph's eyes and nodded seriously. I understand. Ralph turned around, grabbed Shirley's hand, and placed it on his waist, saying, hold on tight. He pushed off with his feet, and the firebolt rose into the air, transforming into a long rainbow as it streaked towards Black Lake. The thunderous alarm woke Crumb from his sleep. He got out of bed and, hearing a commotion outside, hurriedly pushed open the door and looked out. He saw the corridor crowded with students, all scrambling towards the exit. Crumb grabbed the student's arm and asked grimly, Cass, what happened? Fire. Cass broke free from Crumb's grasp and stumbled towards the exit, shouting, Victor, run. Don't just stand there like an idiot. Crumb's thick eyebrows furrowed deeply upon hearing this. This was a magical ship, capable of sinking to the bottom of a lake. What fire couldn't be extinguished? Why such panic? Half believing, he returned to his room, went to the window, and abruptly pulled back the curtains. He stood there, speechless, dumbfounded. He saw flames soaring across the deck, black flames spreading everywhere, engulfing the ship at an unbelievable speed. Crumb recognized it immediately as fiend fire, this evil flame almost impossible to extinguish. Even a single spark could burn a ship. Just then, a burning splinter of wood flew by and struck the glass. The thick magical glass, capable of withstanding the pressure of the deep sea, now seemed like wax, instantly igniting and hissing. Crumb recoiled in fright, taking a step back. Without even changing out of his pajamas, he turned and rushed into the corridor, joining the fleeing crowd. Karkaroff, standing in his own room, also watched the demonic flames raging on the deck through his window. That fiendish flame curse must have been cast by the Death Eaters. Thinking this, Karkaroff's face turned deathly pale, and he trembled with fear. He pressed hard on the dark mark on his left arm until it ached terribly, then slowly released it, his voice trembling as he said, They're here, it must be them. The Death Eaters are here to kill me. Karkaroff was gripped by a nameless terror. He frantically ran to a wardrobe and tremblingly tapped it with his wand. He opened the door, revealing a narrow, secret passage. This passage led directly to the ship's hull, a possible escape route. Karkaroff abandoned the ship's students and, without hesitation, plunged inside. On the deck, the Fiendfire, having consumed countless objects, began to transform, becoming a swarm of magical fire creatures, fire serpents, chimeras, and fire dragons. They darted about, rising and falling, quickly creating a sea of fire. Durmstrang students fleeing from the cabins were in chaos, cries and screams filling the air. A flame climbed the rigging, ignited it, scaled the ropes, and scaled the canvas, growing into a massive black cauldron of flame. The mast, engulfed in flames, collapsed with a deafening roar, crashing down onto the deck. A female student stood directly beneath it, completely unaware. Crumb, at the exit, saw this from afar and shouted, "Leonie, get out of the way. The mast is coming down. Get out of the way." Hearing the shout, Leonie looked up and saw a thick mast hurtling towards her. She froze, her mind blank, unable to think. Crumb tried to rush to her aid, but a barrel flew high above their heads and crashed to the ground, flames immediately spreading. He had to retreat. Leonie collapsed to the ground in terror, letting out a desperate scream. At the last second, a long whip flew through the air, crackling with lightning. It slashed and sliced fiercely at the mast, tearing it apart like a knife through tofu. A burst of orange flame shot out, and the shattered wood, before it even hit the ground, turned to ashes, disappearing into the air with a gust of wind. The next second, a figure landed heavily on the deck like a meteorite, the wind whipping his face and even causing the surrounding black flames to sway backward. Leonie looked up, gazing intently at the handsome young man who had descended from the sky. Rolf reached out his hand to her, his voice gentle. "Hey, are you all right?" Chapter 718 All Curses End. A simple word of concern from Rolf instantly brought Leonie, a survivor of the ordeal, to tears. She suddenly lunged forward, clinging tightly to Rolf's leg and wailing. Rolf tried to pull away, but Leonie held on even tighter. He glanced helplessly at the spreading fire and said, "Hey, if you don't want to die here, stop crying and get up." Leonie finally released her grip, wiping away her tears, and struggled to her feet. But her legs were weak, and she stammered, "I'm scared, my legs won't obey me, I can't walk." Rolf had no choice but to raise his wand and cast a rousing spell on Leonie. Her legs, which had been weak, instantly sprang to her feet as if injected with adrenaline, and she dashed off. But after only a few steps, she retreated. The black flames had formed a circle around them, trapping them in the center, with no way to escape. Leonie's tears welled up again, and she choked out, "The road is blocked, what are we going to do?" Rolf didn't answer, but calmly asked an unrelated question, "Can you swim?" Leonie paused, then nodded, puzzled. "That's good," Rolf said, suddenly reaching out to grab Leonie's waist and lifting her upwards. Leonie watched herself fly over the deck, above the black lake. She already knew what was about to happen, and only cried out no, before Rolf immediately let go. Leonie plummeted, watching helplessly as Rolf walked away without looking back, then plunged into the lake with a splash. She slowly surfaced, spitting out a mouthful of water, and looked up again. Rolf's figure had completely disappeared. Leonie knew that Rolf had gone back to the magic ship to rescue the other students. She silently prayed for his safety as she turned and swam towards the shore. After swimming for about 10 meters, Leonie suddenly saw 7 or 8 small boats approaching her in the distance. Leonie immediately swam towards the boats, and when she reached them, 2 hands grabbed her and pulled her aboard. Fleur conjured a blanket and wrapped it around Leonie, while Hermione used magic to warm her, softly comforting her. It's all right now, thank you all." Leonie thanked them repeatedly. She took a towel, casually dried her wet hair, and then looked at the magical boat with mixed feelings. Having survived the ordeal, she burst into tears again. After rescuing Leonie, Rolf quickly returned to the boat, landing not far from Crumb. Crumb was overjoyed to see Rolf. Others might not know the boy's strength, but he did. After all, Crumb had been there during the Quidditch World Cup final 6 months ago, witnessing Rolf's power firsthand. He knew he was saved today. However, Crumb had just witnessed Rove throwing Leonie into the water, and he felt Rove could have been gentler, less rough. "So," Crumb said in broken English, "Mr. Scamander, could we perhaps discuss this further? Don't just throw me into the lake." Rove ignored Crumb. His attention was focused on another student. The boy's calf was pierced by a piece of wood, bleeding profusely, and he lay on the ground groaning. Rove went to the student, intending to help him up, but the boy struggled violently in pain. Without further ado, Rove punched the student in the stomach, but the guy didn't faint. He then delivered a sharp chop to the neck. This time, the boy's eyes rolled back, and he passed out. Rove helped the unconscious student up, then looked at Crumb and asked, "What did you just say? Could you repeat it?" "I didn't hear you clearly." Crumb swallowed unconsciously and hurriedly shook his head, saying, I didn't say anything." "Oh," Rove tilted his head, looking oblivious, and urged, "Then hurry up and come help." Crumb quickly ran over, helped the unconscious student up, and Rove carried the two towards the lake. A moment later, there were two more splashes, the sound of falling into the water. Hagrid quickly rowed the small boat and pulled the two of them out. Rove returned to the deck and rescued two more students. When he found the third student, the man pointed anxiously to a window and said, Please save them." Rove turned his head and looked through a window. He saw that 5 students were trapped inside the room, and the door was on fire, preventing them from getting out. The students were all pressed against the windows. Although he couldn't hear them through the wall, Ralph knew they were wailing and pleading for help. Ralph immediately raised his wand, aimed it at the glass, and said, "Blast." The spell struck the glass, but it didn't shatter, only a faint scratch appeared. "No," the student hurriedly said, "this is magical glass. It's covered in defensive magic and can withstand many spells." Ralph narrowed his eyes, used the summoning charm to summon the goblin-forged dagger, gripped its smooth dragon bone hilt, and plunged it fiercely into the glass. Sparks flew everywhere, creating a dazzling display. Ralph slashed downwards, cutting the entire pane of glass open, revealing a huge gap. The students scrambled out. "Stay close to me," Ralph said, raising his wand and leading them through the flames towards the ship. Halfway there, a student screamed in terror. Everyone looked in his direction, and the group immediately fell into chaos. A ball of raging fire transformed into a black fire dragon, swooping down from the ship with wings outstretched, its long fiery tail trailing behind it as it hurtled towards them in an arc. The massive black flames bellowed with a fierce wind, as terrifying as the roar of a gigantic beast. This hellish scene was breathtaking, causing the students to scream in terror and retreat hastily. Only Ralph stepped forward fearlessly, standing in front of the others. Under their terrified gazes, he raised his wand high and proclaimed, "End of curses." In mid-air, ripples spread like water, quickly forming a thick mirror-like surface, like a basin of water lifted and then removed, yet the water remained suspended in mid-air. The black fire dragon swooped down, striking the end of curses, creating visible ripples of energy. Instantly, thick smoke billowed, swirling around Ralph, and flames exploded, drifting into the boundless night like hundreds of black fireflies. A fierce, raging wind whipped Ralph's hair back as he pressed his hands down, causing the black fire dragon to slam into the ship without any resistance, like an ox forced to drink water. The Durmstrang students behind Rob stared wide-eyed in shock at the scene. Under the immense impact of the fire dragon, the incredibly sturdy deck bent downwards in an astonishing arc, then snapped in two like a fishing rod. The black fire dragon followed the crack, tearing through the magic ship and plunging to the lake bottom. Meanwhile, Karkaroff, who had already escaped the magic ship and swum to the bottom of the lake, secretly congratulated himself on his cleverness in having left a secret passage in the magic ship. As for the students, so what if they died? His own life was more important. Karkaroff watched the magic ship recede into the distance, then suddenly his eyes widened in disbelief. He saw the magic ship break in two, and then a black fire dragon emerged from the hull and entered the water, heading straight for him. Karkaroff. Chapter 719 Barty Crouch. Hogwarts, the Transfiguration Office. Professor McGonagall stared at Harry and Ron, her eyes blazing with fury. If corporal punishment wasn't illegal, she would have them locked in that cramped little hut piled high with blink balls by now. Moody, leaning on his cane, stood in the corner, admiring the trophies Professor McGonagall had collected in the display case. He noticed that Gryffindor's last house cup was in the 1984-1985 school year, 9 years without one. However, a glance at Harry and Ron, caught out of bed, instantly soothed his displeasure. With students like these, Gryffindor's only hope of winning the house cup was through Dumbledore's favoritism. A few dozen extra points wouldn't be enough, they'd need 100 or 2 to make up for the huge gap. Snape, too, stared at Harry and Ron, his face full of schadenfreude, desperately trying to suppress a laugh. "Tell me," Professor McGonagall finally asked, "why were you two out in the middle of the night instead of sleeping?" Harry and Ron hung their heads, silent, each racking their brains for a reason to wander out at night. They certainly couldn't mention Hagrid, but any other reason seemed unlikely. "Perhaps Potter and Weasley saw Scamander capture Peter Pettigrew and get the Order of Merlin," Snape said sarcastically. "They want to try and capture Barty Crouch to get the Order of Merlin too." "We didn't," Harry retorted. "Then what are you doing?" McGonagall said coldly. After Barty Crouch's escape, Professor Dumbledore repeatedly forbade anyone to leave the common room at night. "Why are you two out wandering around in the middle of the night instead of sleeping?" Professor McGonagall huffed. "You'll both be put in solitary confinement, and Gryffindor will lose 100 points, 100 points each, 100 points, Harry and Snape exclaimed in unison. The two exchanged a glance, then said simultaneously, "Too much, too little." They exchanged another glance, and Snape spoke first with a cold laugh. "Professor McGonagall, these are extraordinary times, unlike before. I think deducting only 100 points from each person is far too lenient. We can't teach a habitual offender like Potter a lesson. At least he should be temporarily suspended from school." Harry stared at Snape speechlessly, thinking, just a night out, and I'm suspended? That's too cruel. Professor McGonagall, of course, couldn't possibly let Harry be suspended. Just as she was about to say something, they suddenly heard a loud bang in the distance. The group quickly went to the window and looked into the distance, immediately dumbfounded. The Durmstrang magic ship floating on the Black Lake was billowing thick smoke. Professor McGonagall, wanting a clearer view, conjured several telescopes. Harry and Ron each received one, and through them, they witnessed an even more unbelievable scene. Ralph had appeared on the deck, pinning down a black fire dragon and ramming it into the Durmstrang magical ship, breaking it in two. Moments later, he returned with a group of students and threw them one by one into the lake. Ron swallowed hard, exclaiming, "Merlin!" Ralph destroyed the Durmstrang ship and threw the students into the lake, trying to drown them. The others exchanged bewildered glances at Ralph. Ralph was unaware that he was being framed as the culprit. He was currently hovering in midair, riding his firebolt, watching the magical ship split in two. Startled by the commotion caused by his own magical clone. "We're here to rescue people, not to destroy the ship," he thought. "Well, the ship's already burned to a crisp, whether we destroy it or not doesn't seem to matter." Rove continued circling in the air, his broom swirling, searching for the students. Come to think of it, he hadn't seen Karkaroff yet. Surely Headmaster Durmstrang hadn't perished in the flames? Just as Rove was wondering, he suddenly heard a song, and then Fawkes descended from the sky. It circled 2.5 times in midair, a gentle breeze stirring it, and flames erupted from its body. The flames formed a golden vortex, from which Dumbledore gracefully descended, landing on the second-floor roof of the magic ship. With the headmaster's appearance, he raised the Elder Wand, and ripples, invisible to the naked eye, spread out from the wand. The black flames quickly dispersed, like fireflies in a summer night sky, twinkling and flying into the air. Seeing this, Ralph breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Professor Dumbledore has finally arrived." At this moment, the girl with the ponytail sitting behind the boy leaned over and said urgently, "Ralph, I think I found the arsonist." Ralph's eyes narrowed and he asked, "Who?" Shirley picked up the Hogwarts map and pointed to a certain place, saying, "Barty Crouch." Standing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Barty Crouch's gaze passed through the Black Lake, fixed on the ship engulfed in flames, and his face turned extremely grim. He knew that was Durmstrang's magical ship, and there was a group of students on board. A young wizard suddenly appeared in the nearby woods, asking in a slightly hoarse, mocking voice, "Was the fireworks show beautiful?" Barty Crouch was startled. He hadn't expected someone behind him. He immediately turned around, but before he could even raise his wand, the man shouted, "Expelliarmus!" Barty Crouch's wand flew from his grasp, soaring high into the air before landing softly in the nearby grass. Obstacles. The man then pointed his wand at Crouch, who longed for his lost wand, only to be knocked down halfway. Crouch lay panting on the ground, staring intently at the young wizard who had attacked him. The young wizard chuckled briefly and said, "You must be wondering how I knew you were here." The young wizard pulled a parchment from his robes and patiently explained, "This map is called the Marauder's Map. It reveals the names of all the wizards who have appeared at Hogwarts 2 Halloweens ago. Peter Pettigrew sneaked into Hogwarts and stole the map. After he was killed by Ralph Scamander, my master gave me the map to find you. My master guessed you would come to Hogwarts to find Dumbledore." The young wizard chuckled. "I didn't expect you to actually come." Barty Crouch narrowed his eyes. He hadn't expected such a map to have exposed his location. "All right, I've answered your questions, now it's my turn to answer mine." The young wizard gazed with mesmerized eyes at the charred boat on the lake, wisps of black smoke and pure white ash rising from the fire. "Isn't this fire beautiful?" he asked. Barty Crouch didn't answer, but instead demanded, "You set this fire?" "I did." The young wizard's lips curled into a slight smile. "It's truly a masterpiece. You can't see such beautiful fireworks in Azkaban, can you?" Barty Crouch glared at the man, demanding, "Why did you set the boat on fire?" "The reason is simple." The young wizard smiled, his eyes narrowing. "Igor Karkaroff was on board. He betrayed his master, so of course I had to get rid of him. Karkaroff is the first traitor to die tonight, but not necessarily the last. Albert, Snape, they will all be dealt with one by one." A flash of anger appeared in Barty Crouch's eyes. He pursed his lips and said, "There are many students on that boat. I know Durmstrang School of Witchcraft and Wizardry only admits pure-blood wizards. Many noble pure-bloods will surely die tonight. It's truly regrettable." The young wizard said this, but his face showed no regret, only a mocking expression. "Who told them to be Karkaroff's students? Traitors are like poisonous weeds, and Karkaroff's students are the roots of those weeds. They must be uprooted and eradicated, otherwise they will spread everywhere." Barty Crouch stared at the young wizard, his face filled with disbelief. "You? How did you become like this?" "Become what? You mean, I've become cruel, vicious, and bloodthirsty." The young wizard was amused by Crouch. He laughed. 13 years ago, Bellatrix, Rodolphus, and Rabestein kidnapped the Longbottoms and tortured them with the Cruciatus curse until they went insane. I was involved, and contributed greatly." Barty Crouch Jr. emerged from the bushes, emaciated with limp, blonde hair, his dull eyes sunken in his skeletal face. He held a wand, pointing it at Barty Crouch lying on the ground, and laughed. "You see, I've always looked like this, my dear father. I'm a Death Eater." Chapter 720 Father and Son. Barty Crouch lay on the damp ground, his sunken eyes fixed on young Barty Crouch. That face, so familiar, now seemed utterly foreign to him. "If I could turn back time, I'd rather let a Dementor kiss you than let you live," Barty Crouch said through gritted teeth. "If your mother knew, she would regret saving you and should have let you rot in Azkaban." "Don't mention my mother," young Barty Crouch said coldly. "Why don't you mention your mother? You killed her." "I didn't," young Barty Crouch roared, raising his wand. With an explosion, Crouch was launched into the air, flying a great distance before crashing heavily to the ground. This outburst of anger caught even Barty Crouch Jr. off guard. He could only force himself to suppress it, shouting, "I didn't kill my mother. It was you. You killed her. You coldly and heartlessly imprisoned me in Azkaban, and since then, my mother has been consumed by grief, her health deteriorating day by day. Father, it was you who killed mother, not me." In the distance, Barty Crouch lay sprawled on the ground, his mouth filled with dirt, blood, and decaying leaves. Hearing his son's words, he struggled to get up, but his back spasmed violently. He must have twisted it in the fall. He slowly hooked onto a tree root, finally managing to sit up with difficulty, and said, "Don't you know why I locked you up in Azkaban? Didn't you just say, you're a Death Eater?" "I am a Death Eater, but you could have saved me. You could have done it so easily." Barty Crouch Jr. angrily pointed at his father. Dumbledore could have testified for Snape's innocence. Narcissa Malfoy could have bribed the Wizengamot jury with a large sum of gold, saying her husband was under the Imperious Curse, thus escaping Azkaban. Barty Crouch Jr. stared intently into his father's eyes, panting with rage, and couldn't help but question, "Why couldn't you have done what they did and saved your poor son? You were the director of the Department of Magical Law, with immense power, holding the power to judge all criminals, and only a step away from becoming minister. You could have released me with just a word." Barty Crouch's hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white, his trembling fingers digging into his skin. He wanted to say something, but words failed him. He could only mutter, "I can't. I can't." Of course you can't. You're such an upright man. I often forget that, because I've rarely met anyone like you in my life," Barty Crouch Jr. said sarcastically. "It seems the Sorting Hat made a mistake back then, sending you to the cunning Slytherin, but to the upright Hufflepuff. But I remember, Even someone as righteous as you has made deals with Death Eaters like Karkaroff. He gives you information on other Death Eaters so you can continue to gain merit, and you help him get his freedom, even though Karkaroff has done far more bad things than I have. To hell with your righteousness. Barty Crouch Jr. spat on the ground disdainfully, snarling, "Father, everything you've done is for a position, for the Minister for Magic. You're afraid that after saving me, you'll be ridiculed by the wizarding world. Look at that Barty Crouch, all that pretense of impartiality." Yet he immediately turns a blind eye to his own son. Barty Crouch Jr. sneered. "So, Father, you can exonerate Karkaroff, but you won't release me. To protect your reputation, you refused to even see me once after I was captured by the Aurors. And you wouldn't even say a word to me during the trial? The most ridiculous thing is that your desperate attempts to distance yourself from your Death Eater son only make you seem cold-blooded. You were just one step away from becoming Minister for Magic, but in the end, that fool Fudge got the better of you." Barty Crouch Jr. couldn't help but burst into laughter, a hearty and satisfying laugh. "Father, it is your vanity, your valuing of honor above all else, that has ruined our family and killed my beloved mother." Barty Crouch's face was deathly pale, his lips trembling, as if he wanted to retort, but he was powerless. He gripped a tree root, veins bulging, and murmured, "You are beyond redemption. I am indeed beyond redemption." Barty Crouch Jr. sneered. "When my father had the opportunity to take me home, but chose to leave me in Azkaban, I was already beyond redemption. When my mother risked her life to free me, my father used the Imperious Curse to control me, keeping me locked up at home for 13 years, I was already beyond redemption." Barty Crouch Jr.'s expression was filled with hatred. "Father, you locked me up at home, and although it wasn't Azkaban, it felt exactly the same to me. Your Imperious Curse these past years has caused me so much pain." Barty Crouch Jr.'s anger surged, and he could no longer control himself, waving his wand. Crunch! Barty Crouch screamed in agony, trying to stand but twisting and falling. Young Barty Crouch watched his father scream, then burst into unrestrained laughter, before finally raising his wand. Barty Crouch lay on the ground, trembling, and very slowly raised his shoulders a few inches, lifting his head to meet his son's gaze. He tried to find some connection in that gaze, something familiar and comforting, but instead felt only utter chilling coldness, a numbness devoid of feeling. Although young Barty Crouch's eyes and hair were exactly the same as his own, he was a complete stranger, his eyes filled with an almost supernatural hatred and a vengeful rage. Barty Crouch's face turned ashen, and two trembling, crystalline tears suddenly welled up in his eyes, slowly sliding down his cheeks. He cried out in despair, You kill me now." Little Barty Crouch gazed at those two lines of tears, feeling they were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He grinned, "Without a doubt, I will. My purpose here today is to kill you. As long as you are dead, my master's secret will not be revealed." Barty Crouch's face was utterly contorted with grief. He fell backward, lying on the ground, screaming in agony, "Do it, as you wish." Little Barty Crouch raised his wand, saying, "Avada Kedavra, take my life." Chapter 721 The Death of Barty Crouch. Barty Crouch Jr. raised his wand, aimed it at his elderly father, and without hesitation, unleashed a blinding green beam that pierced the night sky. Facing the Avada Kedavra curse, Barty Crouch made no move, simply lying on the ground, barely breathing, awaiting death. Just as his life hung in the balance, a thick tree root suddenly shot forward, blocking Barty Crouch's path. With a deafening bang, the root exploded, and the lush, leafy trees withered instantly under the Avada Kedavra curse, their leaves scattering to the ground. Barty Crouch Jr. whirled around and saw a blond boy riding a flying broomstick, hurtling towards him at lightning speed. Barty Crouch Jr.'s pupils contracted sharply. He recognized the boy, Ralph Scamander. It was him, who, a year ago at the Quidditch World Cup, had stormed into the Crouch family tent, revealing his father's harboring of him, leading to their imprisonment in Azkaban. Barty Crouch Jr. still vividly remembered what happened that day, and he couldn't forget the boy's appearance. During this time, he had heard his master mention Scamander quite often, to the point that he was even a little jealous. Barty Crouch Jr. smiled. He hadn't expected to gain anything other than his father tonight. It was truly a double blessing. In that split second, Barty Crouch Jr. had already imagined himself carrying Scamander's corpse back, pleasing the Dark Lord. He even planned what reward he would ask the Dark Lord for. He wanted to kiss his master's feet, to savor every inch of that skin with his tongue. However, when Barty Crouch Jr. turned around again, intending to deal with Barty Crouch Jr. first. More tree roots had already sprouted from the ground, completely enveloping him. Barty Crouch Jr., enraged, tried to destroy the tree roots, but they pounced on him. Initially thin, only as thick as a little finger, they grew rapidly after leaving the ground, quickly resembling black pythons. Without thinking, Crouch Jr. began to retreat, but the roots still grabbed his ankles. He immediately chanted a spell, and several wind blades swirled around him. Before the writhing roots were severed, Crouch Jr. was thrown back, crashing heavily to the ground, tumbling several times upon landing, demonstrating the force of the impact. Ralph raised his wand and fired a spell, which flew towards Crouch Jr., slightly off target, indicating a degree of anticipation. As Crouch Jr. tumbled, his fingers dug into the ground, his feet pushing off the earth to stop himself. The spell landed a short distance away, creating a large crater and scattering dirt everywhere. Barty Crouch Jr. raised his arm, his fingers gripping the wand, bleeding profusely, his nails torn open. He gritted his teeth, held the wand upside down, and retaliated with a spell at the boy. A purple beam, like a small sword, shot towards Ralph's head, which he easily dodged by tilting his head slightly. Barty Crouch Jr. made a hooking motion, and Ralph leaned on his broom, the purple beam flashing past even faster. Had he not dodged, the spell would have pierced through his back. The purple beam split in two, shooting towards Ralph again. He spun on his broom, flying into the sky, the two beams relentlessly pursuing him, then splitting into four in midair. Barty Crouch Jr. controlled the beams, chasing Ralph relentlessly. In his eyes, Scamander was like a drowning dog, fleeing in all directions, hunted down by his magic. But the next second, Ralph, who had been soaring through the air, suddenly shone brightly. Barty Crouch Jr.'s eyes were stung by the dazzling light, and even with his eyes closed, tears streamed down his face. Barty Crouch Jr. could see nothing, and his spells lost their direction, darting around in midair like headless flies. He knew something was wrong and immediately twisted his wand with both hands, summoning a massive round mirror shield in front of him. Ralph, hovering in midair, suddenly remembered the dark magic he had seen in Snape's old textbook. He waved his wand and shouted, "Sword of Shadows!" The next second, the round mirror shield exploded with a deafening roar. A large tear appeared in Barty Crouch Jr.'s robes, revealing a bloody gash on his chest, as if cleaved by an invisible sword. He staggered to the ground, the blood gushing from his chest turning black. With blurred eyes, he looked in horror at Ralph in midair. "I can't die here. I can't." Barty Crouch Jr. mustered his last bit of strength and unleashed his magic. His entire body was immediately enveloped in black mist, and he flew like a bat towards the nearby Forbidden Forest. Once he left Hogwarts and entered the Forbidden Forest, he could use apparition. Ralph was about to give chase when he suddenly heard Sherry's cry. "Ralph! Barty Crouch, he's dying!" Upon hearing this, the boy created a magical clone, which rode off on a firebolt, while his real body quickly returned to the ground, arriving at Sherry's side. He looked at Barty Crouch lying on the ground, his eyes filled with complex emotions. A year ago, Barty Crouch, though over 50, was in good spirits and always impeccably dressed and clean. But now, after the ravages of Azkaban, he looked at least 20 years older. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his face full of wrinkles, and a beard covered his sunken cheeks and thin chin. A few strands of dirty hair obscured his eyes. The girl with the ponytail, who was treating Barty Crouch, looked up and said, "Ralph, he's been calling your and Dumbledore's names, saying it's important." Ralph also had many questions for Crouch, so he squatted down beside him and called out, "Mr. Crouch." Barty Crouch let out a low groan, opened his eyes trembling, and stared at Ralph, as if he didn't understand who he was or what he wanted. "Why is Barty Crouch here?" Ralph asked bluntly. "Isn't he in Azkaban?" Barty Crouch murmured, "Eva. Barty's OWL exam results have arrived. He got 12 certificates. Very impressive, truly our son. Let's celebrate properly tonight. I also bought tickets to your favorite Set in a Warbook concert." Crouch spoke haltingly, repeatedly uttering the name Eva. Crouch was clearly confused. Realizing this, Ralph looked at Sherry and said, "Give him a potion to calm him down." The girl with the ponytail nodded, quickly opened the box, took out a bottle of potion, and gave it to Crouch. A potion to calm him down is a short-term remedy to restore mental and physical strength. Of course, for a dying wizard, this potion will hasten death, providing only a brief moment of lucidity. After Crouch took the medicine, his eyes indeed cleared. He stared at Ralph, his hoarse voice filled with deep pain as he said, "Ralph." "Scamander, is that you?" "It is me, Mr. Crouch," Ralph asked. "Is there anything you want to say?" "I escaped from Azkaban." Crouch gripped Ralph's hand tightly, his eyes bulging. "I just wanted to tell you and Dumbledore the Dark Lord's secret." Ralph was shocked. He hadn't expected Crouch to escape for this reason. He asked impatiently, "You've seen Voldemort?" "Yes," Crouch coughed, blood splattering, but his fingers clenched even tighter. "The Dark Lord has many allies. He's grown stronger." "You must be careful," Ralph frowned. He knew this wasn't something that could be explained in a few words, and Crouch's body wouldn't hold out much longer. He calmly asked, "Can you give me the memories about Voldemort?" Take. A silvery blue substance, neither gas nor liquid, emerged from Crouch's body, coming out of his mouth, ears, and eyes. Ralph used his wand to collect the memories and handed them to Sherry. He then asked, "Mr. Crouch, unicorn blood can prolong your life." Crouch looked at the boy and shook his head laboriously, as if to say, "Never mind, it's too late to save me." Ralph hesitated for a moment, then said, "Do you have any last words, or unfulfilled wishes?" "I will do my best." Crouch's lips moved slightly, and Ralph put his ear to his mouth. A moment later, Barty Crouch died. A look of relief and liberation appeared on his face. Ralph sat on the ground, staring blankly at the corpse. Shirley carefully placed a memory into a bottle, tightened the cap, and whispered, "Ralph, what did Crouch say?" "2 sentences, Ralph said. One was, 'I am guilty, don't save me.' The other was," Ralph sighed softly, "no grave, no tombstone, scatter his ashes in Azkaban. His wife, Eva, is waiting for him there." Shirley gripped Ralph's hand tightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just sitting there in a daze. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 722, Professor McGonagall's Angry Outburst. Barty Crouch was dead. Looking at the corpse, Rove wasn't exactly heartbroken, but a strange sadness settled over him. Barty Crouch's life was undoubtedly divided into 2 parts, a smooth and successful first half, followed by a dramatic fall in middle age due to his son and wife, ultimately leading him down a path of no return. Rove didn't have much affection for Crouch, but he was grateful for the intelligence Crouch had risked his life to deliver. For that alone, Rove would fulfill Crouch's last wish and scatter his ashes in Azkaban. Of course, to finish what he started, Rove also planned to kill Barty Crouch Jr. and scatter his ashes in Azkaban as well, reuniting the family of 3. Rove was that kind and considerate. But this goal was temporarily impossible. Although Barty Crouch Jr. was severely wounded and immobile, he had set up numerous traps in the Forbidden Forest beforehand and escaped using apparition amidst the chaos. When the magical clone brought back the news, Ralph was somewhat regretful, only able to let him live a little longer before reuniting with his parents. Carrying Crouch's body, Ralph and Sherry quickly returned to the Black Lake, where they saw Durmstrang's magical ship in the distance. The fiend fire on the ship had been extinguished, but the hull was nothing but a charred, mangled ruin. Broken masts, charred wood, and tattered sails floated on the lake, a truly tragic sight. Dumbledore stood on the shore, along with Professor McGonagall, Snape, and Moody. They were discussing something with the headmaster and turned to look at the sound of footsteps. Seeing Ralph and Sherry, Professor McGonagall finally breathed a sigh of relief. She had seen the ship on fire through her telescope, hurriedly left the Transfiguration office, and come to the Black Lake, where she encountered Hermione and Fleur, who had been rescuing the students, and learned what had happened from them. But after that, McGonagall hadn't seen Ralph and Sherry, causing her considerable anxiety. Seeing the 2 return safely, Professor McGonagall, relieved, quickly went to them and asked with concern, "Are you 2 hurt?" The girl with the ponytail smiled gently at her and said, "No, Professor McGonagall." Ralph also shook his head. He looked around and, not seeing anyone else, asked, "Where are Hermione and Fleur?" Hearing this, Professor McGonagall was immediately furious. Ralph hadn't slept in the middle of the night, taking 3 girls out for a night stroll. That was bad enough. What was even more outrageous was that he had brought them to put out a fire, that was fiend fire, which would ignite at the slightest touch. How dare they get close? I've already sent them both back to sleep. McGonagall glared at Ralph and said, Mr. Scamander, I must remind you, if you encounter anything this dangerous again, don't go near it. Leave it to the professors to handle. If you continue to violate school rules like this, I'll write to your grandfather and have him come to Hogwarts. Ralph cast a pleading look at Dumbledore, knowing that only he could calm Professor McGonagall down when she was angry. To everyone's surprise, Dumbledore's eyes lit up, and he nodded in agreement, saying, Minerva, that's a good suggestion. I haven't seen Newt in a long time either. Seeing Professor McGonagall purse her lips, still wanting to continue lecturing Ralph, Sherry blinked and timely intervened, saying, By the way, Professor, we also brought this. Professor McGonagall followed Sherry's finger and looked at the long, thin object wrapped in white cloth, floating in midair. She frowned and asked, What is that? Snape narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, It's not Igor Karkaroff, is it? No, Professor Moody's magic. I stopped darting around and stared intently at the white cloth, saying, That's Barty Crouch. This statement shocked everyone, even Dumbledore couldn't help but glance at it. It was indeed Barty Crouch. Ralph pulled back the white sheet and sighed softly. We discovered the arsonist on the magic ship, tracked him down, and found him. He's dead. Hearing that Barty Crouch was dead, everyone's expressions changed. They had all dealt with Crouch, especially Moody, with whom they had worked for decades. Now, upon hearing the news of Crouch's death, Mad Eye's eyes were filled with complex emotions. Snape stared at the corpse, frowning. Scamander, you killed him. I didn't kill him. Ralph shook his head. It was Barty Crouch Jr. Snape thought he had misheard. Who killed him? Barty Crouch Jr., Ralph said with certainty. He killed his father with his own hands at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Not only Snape, but even Professor McGonagall and Moody exchanged bewildered glances, and even Dumbledore seemed shocked. Barty Crouch Jr. killed Barty Crouch Sr. This was an answer no one had expected. If it was Barty Crouch Jr. who did it, Dumbledore said gravely, it means there might be a problem with Azkaban. Professor Dumbledore, I need to borrow your pensieve, Ralph said. Crouch left me some important memories before he died. I'll take you to my office right away. Dumbledore knew the situation was urgent and immediately ordered, Minerva, those Durmstrang students, put them in the school hospital tonight. Severus, you stay on the magical ship and search again to see if any students are missed, and continue searching for Karkaroff. Alastair, you go to Minister Fudge's house now and tell him to come to Hogwarts. Ralph leaned close to the girl with the ponytail and whispered, Shirley, you go back to the castle with Professor McGonagall. Shirley nodded, secretly taking Ralph's hand, and said, See you tomorrow morning. The four went their separate ways, leaving only Ralph and Professor Dumbledore on the shore. Phoenix Fox circled in midair once, and the two men raised their hands, gripping its long, golden tail tightly. With a burst of flame, they vanished instantly. The next second, Ralph appeared in the headmaster's office, where the old headmasters, though realistically snoring and drooling, secretly watched him from under their noses. Dumbledore walked around the desk to a cabinet by the door and bent down. When the headmaster straightened up, he held a shallow stone basin with a circle of symbols engraved around its rim. He placed the pensieve on the table, and Ralph immediately took out a small bottle and poured its contents into it. The memories swirled, turning silvery white in the basin, neither gas nor liquid, with a strange shape. Ralph effortlessly plunged in, Dumbledore following closely behind. Chapter 723 Voldemort's Secret. Ralph and Dumbledore landed in the pensieve, their feet touching the ground on a dusty, dimly lit staircase. Not far away, 3 Aurors and a towering Dementor escorted Crouch and his son down the stairs. Ralph immediately recognized Azkaban. He had been here a year ago with Minister Fudge to investigate the lake where the Dementors were born, so he remembered it. The two followed, heading towards the darkest cell. The dark cell was a place of utter darkness, devoid of any light. Anyone brought there would never see the light of day again, never hear human voices, and would suffer eternal torment. Such a cruel environment, and the prisoners held there, were all wizards sentenced to life imprisonment. Following Barty Crouch's memory, they reached the top of the stairs. A gray, scabbed hand emerged from the Dementor's cloak, holding a set of keys. It inserted them into a lock and opened an iron door. The chains, long neglected, creaked and groaned in protest, sending dust scattering. The heavy iron gate swung open, and the group entered a pitch-black world. The only light source was the ones of the 3 Aurors, their faint, flickering white light piercing through the ancient iron bars and into the cells, revealing many prisoners. They were ragged, emaciated, and skeletal, ignoring passers-by without a second glance, lying motionless like corpses. Their condition was not only due to the appalling environment but also, and perhaps more importantly, to the Death Eater's feeding, which had reduced them to ashes. The Dementor floated forward, leading the Aurors left into another corridor. Here, the prisoners seemed to recognize Barty Crouch, rising to their feet and pounding on the bars, making a tremendous racket. Dumbledore looked at the prisoners, narrowed his eyes, and suddenly asked, "Rolf, have you noticed something? The prisoners here are in much better spirits than those before." Rolf pondered. "When I came last year, they weren't like this." A year ago, Rolf had visited this corridor with Kingsley, and he had even had a friendly exchange with Bellatrix, giving her several large bibs. Back then, the prisoners in this corridor weren't as energetic as they are now. "It is indeed strange," Dumbledore said, pleased with Rolf's keen observation. He said in a deep voice, "If these prisoners were newly imprisoned, their mental state might indeed be good, but most of the prisoners in this corridor are Death Eaters who have been in prison for 13 years, they shouldn't be like this." Just as the two were wondering, a Dementor floated to a cell, opened the door, and sent Barty Crouch inside. Next door to that cell was a man, short and thin like a scarecrow, with a rat-like face and sunken eyes that looked like two black holes. "Please, give me some water, please," the man pleaded hoarsely. A young Auror, seeing the man's pitiful state, hesitated for a moment, then took the water jug from his waist and handed it to him. The man clutched the jug tightly in both hands, gulping down the water hungrily, water dripping from the corners of his mouth and into his beard. "Eddie, we forbid giving prisoners anything," a middle-aged Auror with gray hair sternly reprimanded. "You have violated Article 8 of Section 4 of the Azkaban Code, Uncle." "What uncle?" the middle-aged Auror scolded. "How many times have I told you? You must use titles when you're working." "Yes, Captain," Eddie said obsequiously. "I'll never do it again." Just as the Aurors were talking, Dumbledore looked at the man drinking water and asked, "Rolf, do you know who he is?" Rolf shook his head. "Rodolphus Lestrange," Dumbledore introduced. "He's Sirius's cousin-in-law." Rolf immediately became interested and carefully examined the man. So this was Bellatrix's husband. He wondered if the man knew that his wife had always been deeply in love with a Dark Lord. If he ever met Rodolphus, Rolf would definitely ask him about it. After locking Barty Crouch in his cell, the Aurors took young Barty Crouch to the cell opposite. In the next cell was a dark-skinned woman with thick lips. She was very thin, her bones covered by skin, and her haggard face was starred with two crazed black eyes. The woman leaned against the iron bars, her voice hoarse. "Barty Crouch Jr., weren't you dead already? I was heartbroken for a long time after seeing your body dragged out. How come you're alive again?" Barty Crouch Jr. looked up at the woman, scrutinizing her for a moment before asking uncertainly, "You are Bellatrix?" "It's me." Bella grinned, revealing yellow teeth, and laughed. "How did you escape?" Barty was about to explain when the middle-aged Auror snapped, "Shut up. Prisoners aren't allowed to communicate." Bella laughed loudly. "I know without you saying it. Barty Crouch sent you out, didn't he? You were caught by Rolf Scamander and sent back again. Don't you hate him? I'll take you to kill that brat." Rolf, hearing Bella's words, looked shocked. His shock wasn't that Bella wanted to kill him, but that she knew the whole story of Barty Crouch Jr.'s past. Bellatrix was imprisoned in Azkaban, so how could she know so much? The Auror clearly realized this as well, and was about to ask when he heard a scream behind him. The middle-aged Auror turned around and saw his nephew Eddie lying on the ground, groaning, his hands covered in blood. It turned out that Rodolphus, while returning the water jug, had suddenly grabbed Eddie's arm through a gap in the bars, shoved it into his mouth, and bit off two of his fingers. Rodolphus chewed on the fingers, licking the blood from his mouth, and cruelly laughed. "Boy, this is what happens when you have too much pity." Hey, the remaining two Aurors drew their wands, but what happened next caught everyone off guard. Bellatrix and Rodolphus also raised their wands, and red light shot through the corridor. Before the two Aurors could react, they collapsed to the ground. Barty Crouch Jr., looking dazed, asked, "You, how do you have wands?" Bella didn't answer, but instead looked humbly at the motionless Dementor and asked, "Master, should we kill Barty Crouch?" "No need," a hoarse voice came from the Dementor's body. "Killing Barty Crouch now will surely alert Fudge. Use the Oblivion Charm to erase his memories." "Yes." Bella took out a key, opened the cell door, and went out. The Dementor looked at Barty Crouch Jr., then suddenly pulled back its hood, revealing a terrifying face. Even more chilling was that on the back of the Dementor's head was another face, as white as chalk, with glowing red eyes and two long, thin nostrils like snakes. Voldemort asked in a hoarse voice, "Barty Crouch Jr., it's been a long time. Are you still as loyal to me as you were back then?" Bellatrix walked to the cell and pointed her wand at Barty Crouch. Before Crouch lost consciousness, he saw his son kneeling on the ground, kissing the Dementor's robes with fervent passion. He exclaimed excitedly, "Master, I have always been your most loyal servant." Chapter 724 The Missing Dementor. After leaving the Pensieve, Ralph and Dumbledore returned to the headmaster's office. They sat in their chairs, neither speaking for a moment, both quietly processing the memory containing a vast amount of information. Ralph had known Voldemort had a new accomplice. He had suspected many people, even Malfoy, but he hadn't considered the Dementors. But it had to be said, Voldemort's possession of the Dementors' heads was indeed a brilliant move. This not only allowed him to easily contact the Death Eaters of Azkaban, but also to rescue them silently. However, when had Voldemort come into contact with the Dementors and become possessed by them? Ralph rubbed his temples, suddenly remembering something. He asked, "Professor, do you remember last year when a Dementor went missing in Azkaban?" Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, looking at the boy with a half-smile, and corrected him, "Ralph, 2 Dementors went missing in Azkaban. One returned a few months later, but the other hasn't returned yet." Ralph looked at the old man's seemingly all-knowing eyes, scratched his head, and chuckled awkwardly. "Speaking of which, I think I've seen a Dementor somewhere before." He seemed to be trying to recall, then suddenly exclaimed, "Ah! I remember now, it was in my chest. I was patrolling on my Thunderbird when I saw a Dementor floating in midair." Ralph's tone made it sound as if the Dementor had accidentally lost itself in his chest. These words undoubtedly drew unanimous disdain from the portraits of the headmasters on the wall. Even Phineas Black sarcastically remarked, "Caught a Dementor and then act like it's none of your business? You're wasting your talent by not coming to Slytherin." "I didn't catch the Dementor." Ralph rolled his eyes. "Headmaster Black, don't talk nonsense, or I'll sue you for defamation." Dumbledore chuckled. "Indeed, it has nothing to do with Ralph. If I'm not mistaken, it was Swinton and Miss Granger who caught it in the secret passage leading to Honeydukes." Ralph couldn't help but smile wryly. He knew Hogwarts couldn't hide anything from Dumbledore. However, he still feigned surprise and said, pretending to be confused, "Is that so? I'll definitely give Sherry and Hermione a good scolding when I get back." These insincere words were met with another chorus of boos from the portraits of the headmasters. Ralph quickly changed the subject, saying, "Last Easter, Peter Pettigrew used the Imperious Curse to control Thor Crocker, the humility of the Department of Mysteries, and tricked Hermione into giving him the Time Turner. I discovered the problem and chased after him with Sherry and Hermione, all the way to Hogsmeade. Then Peter Pettigrew lured a group of Dementors, attacked the 3 of us, and then, in the chaos, took Voldemort and used the Time Turner to travel back to Halloween the year before last." Ralph paused, his eyes brightening, and said, "The other Dementor was the one that disappeared near Hogsmeade during last year's Easter holidays." Dumbledore understood Ralph's meaning. He touched his long, slender fingers together, rested his chin on them, and looked at the boy through his half-moon spectacles, saying, "You mean, the missing Dementor was taken away by Peter Pettigrew using the Time Turner?" "That's what I think." Ralph nodded. "After Peter Pettigrew died, Voldemort possessed the Dementor and then went to Azkaban to contact his Death Eaters." "That's a very plausible guess," Dumbledore mused. He was about to say something when a commotion erupted outside the door. The door was quickly pushed open, and a large group of people rushed in, Minister Fudge, Umbridge, and Moody following closely behind. Ralph was puzzled. Professor Moody had gone directly to Fudge's house to see him, so why was Umbridge there too? Surely Umbridge wouldn't be at Fudge's house in the middle of the night, reporting to him? That's incredibly diligent. The thought flashed through his mind, and Fudge excitedly rushed to Ralph, grabbing his hand tightly and exclaiming, "Ralph, I heard from Alastair, you caught Barty Crouch." "That's wonderful, it's a huge relief." Rita Skeeter's revelation of Barty Crouch's escape had put Fudge under immense pressure lately, making his days very difficult. But now that Ralph had caught Barty Crouch, even if it was just a corpse, it would be enough to appease the public. Fudge could once again peacefully serve as Minister for Magic. That bastard Barty Crouch actually dared to use fiend fire to burn Durmstrang's ship. He's utterly depraved. Minister Fudge gripped Ralph's hand, thankfully saying, "Luckily you discovered the fire and saved many Durmstrang students. I think I'll have to apply for another order of Merlin for you. You're only 14, and you're already getting 3 orders of Merlin? That's astonishing." "Thank you, Minister Fudge," Ralph smiled. "But I wasn't the only one who put out the fire. My classmate Swinton, Granger. I'll give you a list later. See if you can help apply for the Order of Merlin for them all." Just as Fudge was stunned, Ralph pulled his hand away and continued, "Also, the fire wasn't started by Barty Crouch. It was his son, Barty Crouch Jr. Who? Barty Crouch Jr. Fudge and Professor McGonagall, like when they first heard the name, looked blank, then immediately denied it. "No, that's impossible. He's in Azkaban." "Barty Crouch was also in Azkaban, but he still escaped," Ralph retorted. Minister Fudge was speechless for a moment. He thought for a moment, then hurriedly asked, "Did you catch him?" "No," Ralph shook his head. "Barty Crouch Jr. was seriously injured, but he still managed to appear and escape." Fudge felt dizzy. Catching Barty Crouch Jr. was enough to quell public anger. But now that Barty Crouch Jr. had escaped, things were back to square one. However, Dumbledore's next words were like a heavy blow to Fudge's head. "Corneli, not only Barty Crouch Jr., but all the Death Eaters in Azkaban have probably escaped." Fudge blinked, staring blankly at Dumbledore, seemingly unable to fully believe what he had just heard. The next second, everything went black, and he collapsed to the ground. Minister Fookie. Chapter 725 The Unseemly Fudge. Overwhelmed by the barrage of good news from Ralph and Dumbledore, Minister Fudge couldn't take it anymore and collapsed on the spot. It's not surprising that Fudge's mental defenses were so fragile. Anyone in his position as Minister of Magic, woken up in the middle of the night to be told about the Death Eaters' mass breakout, would break down. Ralph, the veterinarian, then came in handy. He first pinched Fudge's philtrum, then performed CPR, and even had Umbridge give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation while spraying water on his face. Under Ralph's expert medical skills, Fudge finally awoke, panting heavily as he wiped the water from his cheeks and stammered in fear, "The Death Eaters, a mass breakout? That's impossible, absolutely impossible. If they broke out, the Dementors would definitely have given a warning." "The Death Eaters attacked several Aurors on their way to Azkaban while they were in prison," Dumbledore explained. "If I'm not mistaken, they used Polyjuice Potion to transform into Aurors, then had those Aurors take their place in the cells, and then left Azkaban. The Dementors are blind, they can only smell a few wizards coming in and a few leaving, so they weren't alerted." "That's impossible," Fudge retorted. "The Death Eaters were imprisoned in Azkaban. Where would they get Polyjuice Potion? They didn't have wands either. How could they attack Aurors? Voldemort brought them in," Ralph interjected. "Do you remember that Dementor that disappeared for months before returning? Voldemort possessed it and entered Azkaban." Fudge's eyes widened abruptly, his mouth agape in shock, speechless for several seconds. He stared at Ralph, stammering, "The Mystic is possessing a Dementor? Ralph, don't be ridiculous. The Mystic is long dead. He was killed by the boy who survived 13 years ago that night, obviously." Ralph shrugged. "Voldemort is dead, but not completely." Umbridge, watching the trembling Fudge, suddenly asked in a coquettish voice, "Mr. Scamander, how do you know all this?" Ralph felt a chill run down his spine at Umbridge's voice. He forced himself to speak, pointing to the pensieve on the table. "Barty Crouch gave me his memories before he died, including how Voldemort and the Death Eaters attacked the Aurors." Umbridge let out a long "oh," her eyes lighting up. "So, the Void and the Death Eaters' escape were all things from Barty Crouch's memories?" Minister Fudge, listening to Umbridge's words, cried out excitedly, like a drowning man grasping at a straw. "Barty Crouch's memories? That must be fake. Ralph, don't forget, you exposed Crouch and his son's secret and sent them to Azkaban, and I," Fudge pointed to himself, his voice trembling with emotion, "I stole Crouch's coveted position as Minister of Magic. We are the wizards he hates most in the world. He definitely deliberately altered his memories to mislead you into believing Void is still alive, to make everyone think you've gone mad. He also wanted to trick me into believing in the Death Eater's mass escape, because if he really announced that news, he would definitely be ousted." "How vicious!" Fudge became more and more agitated, his face flushed red, pacing around Ralph. "Crouch could come up with such insidious tricks even on his deathbed." "Ralph, you mustn't fall for it." Ralph remained non-committal, only saying softly, "Minister, A trip to Azkaban now will surely reveal the truth. As for the Aurors who were attacked, you can summon them to check if they've taken Polyjuice Potion. However, I suspect they may already be missing. Fudge's expression shifted, turning to Dumbledore. Albus, you haven't been deceived by Crouch like Ralph, have you? Cornell, the Death Eaters have escaped. With their help, Voldemort will surely regain his former power, Dumbledore said seriously. You need to take immediate action. We might still be able to salvage the situation. First and foremost, the most important step is to issue arrest warrants for the escaped Death Eaters. Albus, I can't possibly issue warrants for criminals still in Azkaban. That would be utterly ridiculous. Fudge waved his arms excitedly. Seeing Dumbledore staring at him intently, he softened his tone, saying, "All right, I'll go check Azkaban." With that, he strode towards the door. After the Minister and Umbridge left, Professor Moody immediately said, "Albus, knowing Fudge as I do, whatever he finds in Azkaban, he won't issue a warrant for the Death Eaters." "Yes," Dumbledore said gravely. "Fudge is afraid that if he announces a group of Death Eaters has escaped, the angry public will force him to resign." Ralph stood silently to the side, but his eyes flickered. If Fudge wasn't willing to be dignified, then he would have to be dignified for him. In the ancient cemetery, piles of lichen-covered graves were stacked, each tombstone bearing the same design, a shield with a mountain symbol, 2 pentagrams, and a short sword, flanked by 2 leaping greyhounds. Voldemort floated before a tombstone, quietly listening to Barty Crouch Jr.'s fragmented report. His voice hoarse, he said, "So, not only did you fail to kill Barty Crouch, but you also allowed Rolf Scamander to find him, and you yourself were almost killed by Scamander." Barty Crouch Jr. felt an immense killing intent bearing down on him, an aura more chilling than the cold wind of the graveyard. "Master, it's all my fault for being incompetent," Barty Crouch Jr. murmured, lying on the ground. "Since you knew you were incompetent, you shouldn't have come back alive," Voldemort said coldly. Bellatrix stood to the side, staring at Barty Crouch Jr., who was covered in blood, wounds running from his shoulder to his waist, as if he had been cleaved in two by a single, powerful blow from above. Though not dead yet, Barty Crouch Jr. was on the verge of death, barely breathing. In the past, Bellatrix would have already mocked Barty Crouch Jr. as a good-for-nothing. But a year ago, at the Merlin Medal Award ceremony, she had used Polyjuice Potion to impersonate Lady Karst and attack Scamander, only to be severely wounded and escape. Given Bella's own actions, it was difficult to criticize Barty. After all, she didn't want to be hit by her own boomerang. Voldemort suddenly asked, "Bella, how's the arrangement in Azkaban? Those wizards who took Polyjuice Potion and were stationed in Azkaban in our place have all been killed," Bella replied immediately. However, she hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Master, can we fool Dumbledore?" "No need to fool him," Voldemort sneered. "Just fool the Ministry of Magic." "Dumbledore isn't a minister, he's just a Hogwarts headmaster." Voldemort glanced at the dying Barty Crouch Jr. and said coldly, "Take him away and heal his wounds." "He can't die yet." "Yes, Master." Bella waved her wand and quickly left with Barty Crouch Jr. She had barely stepped out of the graveyard when she heard Voldemort's furious curses. "Rolf Scamander, it's you again, it's always you. When I'm resurrected, I will kill you, skin you alive, and turn you into an inferi." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.